The cardboard box felt heavier than it should have as I carried it down the steps of what used to be my office. Security watched from the lobby, making sure I didn't steal anything on my way out. Funny, considering I'd brought most of the items on my desk from home. My name is Rebecca, and this wasn't how I'd planned to start my 34th year. I'm so sorry, Becca. Kira waited by her car, arms open. I dropped the box and fell into her embrace, finally letting the tears flow. We'll figure this out, I promise. The layoff hadn't been a complete surprise. The company had been struggling for months. What I hadn't expected was how quickly everything else would unravel. 2 weeks later, I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, staring at an eviction notice. You can stay with me, Kira offered, but I knew her tiny studio barely fit her own things. I scrolled through my contacts, finger hovering over Blake's name. My successful older brother, living in his mansion across town. We hadn't spoken in months, but surely he'd help family. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Rebecca? This is unexpected. Blake, I need help. My voice cracked. I lost my job, and now my apartment. Let me stop you right there. His tone shifted from surprised to cold. I'm not your personal ATM. Maybe if you'd been more responsible with your money. I was responsible. The company went under and my savings, not my problem. Have you tried asking Mum and Dad? I gripped the phone tighter. They're barely making ends meet with Dad's medical bills, you know that. Then I suggest you figure something out. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Blake, please, I'm not asking for a handout. Just a loan until... The line went dead. I stared at my phone, remembering the brother who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms to make sure I wasn't scared. The same brother who'd promised to always look out for me after Dad's first heart attack. He hung up on me, I told Kira, who'd witnessed the whole conversation. My own brother hung up on me. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders. What a jackass! You know what? This calls for wine. 2 hours and 1 bottle later, I scrolled through social media, torturing myself with photos of Blake's perfect life. His engagement announcement to Oakley, their vacation in the Maldives, his new Tesla. Look at this. I thrust my phone at Kira. He donated $50,000 to some charity gala last month. $50,000, but he can't help his sister. Stop looking at that stuff. It'll only make you feel worse. But I couldn't stop. Each photo felt like a fresh betrayal. You know what the worst part is? He knows what it's like to struggle. Remember when he lost everything in that bad investment? Dad and I emptied our savings to help him start over. And now he's conveniently forgotten that part, Kira said, pouring more wine. I stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. I'm going to prove him wrong. I'll rebuild everything without his help. And then, I paused, the weight of my next words heavy on my tongue. And then, when he needs something from me, because everyone eventually needs something, I'll remember this moment. Becca, no, I mean it. He thinks I'm irresponsible. Watch me become everything he claims I'm not. And more. Kira studied me carefully. Just don't let revenge consume you, okay? But it was too late. As I packed my belongings into storage the next day, each box represented another brick in the wall I was building between my old life and my new one. Between the sister who would have done anything for her brother and the woman who would never forget his betrayal. I found a shelter for women in crisis, ironic considering I used to donate to places like this. The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Janet, helped me secure a bed. It's temporary, she assured me, just until you get back on your feet. That night, lying on the narrow bed, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I'd create a place like this, but better. A foundation to help women who, like me, had nowhere else to turn. And when that day came, I'd make sure Blake saw exactly what his sister accomplished without him. I pulled out my phone one last time, typing a final message to my brother. I won't forget this, and someday, neither will you. Then I blocked his number, turned off my phone and closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the shelter, women's voices, children's laughter, distant sirens, lull me into an uneasy sleep Tomorrow would be day one of my new life, and I was ready to rise. 3 years can change everything. I stared at my reflection in the gleaming windows of my new office building, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. Gone were the desperate eyes and slumped shoulders. In their place stood someone stronger, sharper, ready to take on the world. "Ms. Rebecca?" My assistant Sarah poked her head around the door. "Mr. Jarvis is here for your meeting." Jarvis stood as I entered the conference room, his familiar grin lighting up his face. "There's my favourite success story." "Please," I laughed, "you say that to all your mentees. Only the ones who go from shelter resident to business owner in 3 years." He spread out some papers on the table. "Speaking of which, the paperwork for your foundation is almost ready. The Women's Crisis Foundation. My dream, slowly becoming reality. After leaving the shelter, I'd thrown myself into work, starting with freelance consulting. One client led to another, and soon I had my own successful business consulting firm. But that was just the means to an end. "I still can't believe you're giving up your consulting business for this," Kira said later that evening over dinner. "You built it from nothing. The consulting was never the end goal." I took a sip of wine, much better quality than what we'd drunk that night on my apartment floor. "Besides, I'm not giving it up entirely. The revenue will help fund the foundation." "Have you told your family yet?" I shook my head. "Mom calls sometimes, but I haven't mentioned it. And Blake?" I trailed off, remembering my last glimpse of him at Dad's birthday last year. He'd barely acknowledged my presence. "Speaking of family," Kira hesitated, "I saw Oakley at the gym yesterday. She asked about you." "Did she mention the wedding?" I kept my voice neutral, though the invitation's absence still stung. "Actually, she said it's been postponed. Something about Blake being sick." My phone buzzed before I could respond. Mum's number flashed on the screen. "Rebecca!" Her voice sounded strange, strained. "We need to talk. It's about Blake." "Mom, I'm actually in the middle of—" "He's sick, Rebecca, really sick. His liver is failing." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" "The doctors say he needs a transplant. We've all been tested, but none of us are matches." She paused, and I knew what was coming. "We need you to get tested." The wine turned sour in my mouth. "You want me to get tested? After everything?" "He's your brother, Rebecca. Whatever happened between you?" "Whatever happened?" I laughed, but there was no humour in it. "He left me homeless, Mom. When I needed him most, he turned his back on me." "I know, sweetheart, but no buts. I have to go." I hung up, hands shaking. Kira reached across the table. "Becca, don't." I stood up abruptly. "I need some air." The night air was cool against my face as I walked, memories flooding back unbidden. Blake teaching me to ride a bike. Blake at my college graduation. Blake turning me away when I needed him most. My phone buzzed again. Jarvis this time. "I just got off the phone with another potential donor," he said when I answered. "They're interested in the foundation, but they want to see more concrete plans." An idea began forming in my mind. What if we had a major donor already lined up? Someone with influence in the community? That would certainly help. "You have someone in mind?" I thought of Blake, of his perfectly curated social media presence, his connections, his wealth. "Maybe. I need to make some calls." Back home, I pulled up Blake's contact information, still blocked after all these years. My finger hovered over the unblock button. "You're really going to do this?" Kira had followed me home, concern etched on her face. "Why not? He wants something from me, I want something from him. Seems fair." "This isn't like you, Becca. The old me died the night Blake hung up on me." I pressed unblock. It's time he learned actions have consequences. I typed out a message. "Mom called. I'll get tested on one condition. We need to talk about my foundation." The response came almost immediately. "What foundation?" I smiled, remembering my promise in the shelter 3 years ago. "Meet me tomorrow at the Grove Cafe, 10 a.m. I'll explain everything." After sending the address, I turned to Kira. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm done being the family doormat." "Just remember," she said softly, Revenge might feel good, but it won't heal what's broken. Maybe not, but as I prepared for bed that night, I couldn't help thinking that sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something stronger. The Grove Cafe buzzed with morning energy, but I barely noticed the crowd. My attention fixed on Blake the moment he walked in. He looked different, thinner, paler, with a slight yellow tinge to his skin. But his expensive suit was still perfectly pressed, his watch still worth more than my first car. "Rebecca." He slid into the seat across from me, Oakley hovering protectively at his side. "You look terrible," I said, not bothering to soften the blow. "Always direct, aren't you?" He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom says you'll get tested." "I have conditions." Oakley sat down beside him, her hand on his arm. "Conditions? This is your brother's life we're talking about." "Exactly." I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "This is my proposal for the Women's Crisis Foundation. I need funding, public support, and your connections." Blake leafed through the papers, his expression unreadable. "You want me to fund your charity in exchange for potentially saving my life?" "It's not just a charity. It's a comprehensive support system for women in crisis. Housing, job training, childcare, legal aid. Everything I needed when you turned me away." He flinched at that. "That was different." "How?" I leaned forward. "How was it different, Blake?" "You're really going to hold that over me now? When I'm sick?" "I'm offering you a chance to make it right." I tapped the folder. $5 million in seed funding, plus your public support as a board member. In return, I'll get tested. If I'm a match, I'll donate. Oakley's grip on Blake's arm tightened. "This is extortion. This is business." I met her gaze steadily. "Something Blake understands very well." "I need time to think about this," Blake said, closing the folder. "You have 24 hours. After that, I'm moving forward with other investors." He stood up shakily, Oakley supporting him. "You've changed, Rebecca." "You're right, I have." I watched them leave, my hands trembling under the table despite my calm exterior. My phone rang almost immediately. "Mom." "Blake just called," she said without preamble. "How could you do this to him?" "Do what? Offer him a chance to help others while helping himself?" "He's dying, Rebecca. Your own brother is dying and you're trying to blackmail him." "That's not," I started, but she cut me off. "Your father and I raised you better than this. What happened to the sweet girl who used to bring home injured birds?" "She grew up, Mom. She learned that family loyalty only goes one way in this family." "Please," her voice cracked, "please don't do this. Just get tested. We can talk about your foundation later." "No, I'm done putting everyone else first. This is my condition. Take it or leave it." The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice heavy with disappointment. "I don't recognize you anymore. Maybe you never really knew me at all." Back at my office, Jarvis was waiting. "How did it go?" "About as well as expected." I sank into my chair. "They think I'm heartless." "Are you sure about this approach? There are other ways to fund the foundation." "It's not just about the money." I pulled up Blake's social media profile, still full of perfectly curated photos, though none recent. "It's about making him understand. Making them all understand." My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Can we talk? Just us?" I hesitated before responding. "Dinner tonight? My place." His reply came quickly. 7 p.m. I'll bring pizza like old times." That evening, Dad sat at my kitchen counter, looking older than I remembered. "Nice place you've got here." "I did it all without help," I said pointedly. "I know." He took a bite of pizza. "That's part of why I'm proud of you." I nearly dropped my slice. "You're what?" "Proud. You pulled yourself up when life knocked you down." "But Rebecca," he set down his pizza, "don't let that strength turn into cruelty. It's not cruelty to want something in return." "No, it's not." He wiped his hands slowly. "But is this really about the foundation, or is it about making Blake suffer?" I stared at the pizza, suddenly not hungry. "Can't it be both?" "Oh, sweetheart." He reached across the counter and took my hand. The thing about revenge is it has a way of poisoning everything, even the good things we do. My phone lit up with a text from Blake. "Let's meet tomorrow. All of us. We need to discuss your terms." Dad squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, remember, you can't heal old wounds by creating new ones." But as I typed my response agreeing to the meeting, I wondered if some wounds were beyond healing anyway. The family estate hadn't changed in 3 years. Same manicured lawn, same pretentious fountain, same overwhelming sense of not belonging. I parked my car next to Blake's Tesla and took a deep breath. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Everyone's in the living room. The tension hit me like a wall as I entered. Blake and Oakley sat together on the leather sofa, Dad occupied his usual armchair, and Mom hovered nervously between them all. "Well," Blake broke the silence, "you have our attention." I pulled out my presentation folder. "The foundation needs—" "No," Mom interrupted. "Before we discuss any of that, we need to talk about what happened 3 years ago." "Mom, please," Blake started. "No, she's right." I set down the folder. "Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I called you crying, begging for help. And you hung up on me." "I was protecting my assets," Blake defended. "You weren't exactly making good choices. I lost my job in a company-wide layoff. How was that my choice?" "You should have had more savings," he shot back. "Like you did?" I laughed bitterly. "Or did you forget about the time Dad and I bailed you out after your failed investment?" Dad shifted in his chair. "That was different. Blake had a solid plan. And I didn't?" I pulled out my phone, opening photos from 3 years ago. "Here's my bank statements showing regular savings. Here's my perfect credit score before the layoff. Here's the severance package I stretched as far as I could." Oakley leaned forward, actually looking at the evidence. "Blake, did you know about this?" "It doesn't matter now," he muttered. "It matters to me," she said quietly. Mom wrung her hands. "We all make mistakes. Can't we just move forward?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." I opened my folder again. "The foundation will help women who find themselves in similar situations, women who have nowhere else to turn." "And you need $5 million for this?" Blake asked. "I need more than that, but $5 million will get us started. The rest I can raise once we have your name and connections behind it." "This is emotional manipulation," Mom protested. "No," Oakley surprised everyone by speaking up. "This is brilliant business strategy. She's leveraging her position just like you taught her, Blake." Blake's face flushed. "That's not—" "Not what?" "Not fair." I stood up. "Let me tell you about fair. Fair is sleeping in a shelter because your millionaire brother wouldn't loan you 2 months' rent. Fair is watching that same brother post about his charitable donations while you're eating at soup kitchens." "You never told us it was that bad," Dad said softly. "Would it have mattered? You all took his side. Always have." "That's not true," Mom protested. "Really? Remember my 10th birthday? Blake broke my bike, but you bought him a new video game to make him feel better about being punished." "We were children," Blake scoffed. "Fine. How about my college graduation? You showed up 3 hours late because Blake had a golf game, or last Christmas when—" "Enough!" Blake stood up, swaying slightly. "You want to punish me? Fine, but using my illness as leverage is cruel." "Crueler than leaving your sister homeless?" The room fell silent. Oakley stood up, placing a hand on Blake's arm. "She has a point, honey. And the foundation, it's actually a good cause." "You're taking her side?" "I'm trying to see all sides." She turned to me. "If Blake agrees to your terms, how soon can you get tested?" "I'll make the appointment tomorrow." Mom started crying softly. Dad got up and put an arm around her. "I need to think," Blake said. "This is too much." "You have until tomorrow," I reminded him. "After that, I'm moving forward with or without you." As I turned to leave, Dad followed me to the door. "Rebecca, wait." I paused on the porch. "That day, with the bike," he said, "I never knew you remembered that, or that it hurt you so much." "I remember everything, Dad. Every time Blake came first. Every time my feelings didn't matter." He looked older suddenly, tired. We thought we were protecting him because he was more sensitive. We never realized we were hurting you in the process. Well, now you know. I stepped off the porch. And now you all have a choice to make. And if he doesn't agree, I turned back one last time. Then he'll finally understand how it feels to need something desperately and have family turn their back on you. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from Oakley. Give him time. He's starting to understand. Maybe she was right, but understanding wasn't enough anymore. I needed action, commitment, and most of all, I needed them all to finally see me, really see me, for who I'd become. The hospital waiting room buzzed with nervous energy as I waited for my blood test results. Kira sat beside me, scrolling through social media. Blake's trending locally, she said, showing me her phone. Someone leaked about his condition. I skimmed the comments, mostly sympathy and well wishes from the business community. No mention of his sister's ultimatum. Yet. Rebecca, a nurse called my name. Dr. Marshall will see you now. The doctor's office was cramped but cozy. She smiled as she pulled up my results. Well, I have news. I'm a match, I said, reading her expression. A very good one, actually. Your blood type and tissue markers are highly compatible. My phone buzzed. Blake calling. I declined it. I'll need time to think about proceeding, I told Dr. Marshall. Of course, but please understand, your brother's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Time is a factor. Outside the office, I found not just Kira waiting, but Mom and Oakley too. Well, Mom stepped forward. I'm a match. She burst into tears, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Don't celebrate yet. Blake hasn't agreed to my terms. He wants to meet, Oakley said. At his office. Now. Of course he does. His territory, his terms. Becca, Kira touched my arm. Maybe it's time to... I'll go, I cut her off. But I'm not backing down. Blake's office occupied the entire top floor of his building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, including, I noticed, the shelter where I'd stayed. He sat behind his massive desk, looking worse than yesterday. Oakley stood by the window while Mom paced nervously. You're a match, he said as I entered. Yes. And you're still insisting on your conditions? I placed a new folder on his desk. Updated proposal. 5 million seed funding, public board membership, and your corporate connections. You're really going to watch me die if I say no. Are you really going to let yourself die out of pride? Mom made a distressed sound. Oakley turned from the window. Blake, please. He opened the folder, scanning the contents. Your foundation. How many women would it help? Hundreds, maybe thousands eventually. Housing, job training, childcare, legal support, everything they need to rebuild their lives. Like you did? Yes. But not everyone is as lucky as I was. Not everyone finds people like Jarvis to mentor them. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I counter-offer? 3 million advisory board position only. No deal. Damn it, Rebecca. He slammed his hand on the desk. This is my life we're talking about. And these are women's lives we're talking about. Women who have nothing, no one, nowhere to turn. Blake, Oakley interrupted softly, look out the window. He turned his chair slowly. From his view, the shelter was clearly visible. That's where I slept, I said quietly, for 3 months, while you posted photos of your vacation homes and charity galas. I didn't know, because you didn't want to know. You didn't want to think about your little sister sleeping in a shelter, using food banks, working 3 jobs to save enough for a security deposit. Mom had stopped pacing. 3 jobs. Waitressing mornings, retail afternoons, office cleaning at night, while applying for every job I could find. Blake's hands trembled as he turned back to the folder. 5 million is a lot of money. You spent more on your last yacht. Oakley moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. Think about it, Blake. Really think about what this could mean, not just for Rebecca, but for your legacy. My legacy. He laughed weakly. My legacy might be dying because I was too proud to help my sister. It doesn't have to be. I pulled out the final document, the agreement. It could be helping thousands of women rebuild their lives. It could be turning past mistakes into future hope. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Blake picked up his pen, then set it down again. "I need to speak to Rebecca alone," he said finally. Mom started to protest, but Oakley gently led her out. The door clicked shut behind them. "Before I sign this," Blake said, "I need to know something. If I hadn't gotten sick, would you have ever forgiven me?" I looked out at the shelter, remembering those long, dark nights. "I don't know, but I do know this. Sometimes it takes breaking something completely to build it back stronger." He picked up the pen again. "Is that what we're doing here? Breaking everything to rebuild it? That depends on what you do next." The pen hovered over the agreement. Outside, storm clouds gathered, casting shadows across the city. The same view, but everything was about to change. The pen scratched against paper as Blake signed the agreement. Each stroke seemed to echo in the quiet office. "There," he said, pushing it across the desk. "You win. This isn't about winning, isn't it?" He leaned back, exhaustion evident in every movement. "You've got everything you wanted. The money, the support, your revenge. Is that what you think this is? Just revenge?" "What else should I think?" His voice cracked. "You're my little sister, Rebecca. The same sister who used to leave notes in my lunchbox when I had big tests. Who defended me when those kids in high school spread rumors about me. When did we become this?" I sat down across from him. "You really want to know. It wasn't when you refused to help me. It was the way you did it. Like I was nothing. Like all those years of me being there for you meant nothing." "I was scared," he whispered. "What?" "I was scared, okay?" He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "That investment disaster, it nearly broke me. Not just financially, but mentally. After that, I promised myself I'd never risk my security for anyone. I wasn't asking you to risk everything. I needed 2 months' rent. I know that now." He picked up the foundation proposal again. "Reading this, seeing everything you've built, I was wrong about you. About everything." Thunder rumbled outside. The storm was getting closer. "Remember when we were kids?" he asked. "During storms, you'd come to my room because you were scared of thunder. And you'd build a pillow fort and tell me stories until I fell asleep. What happened to those kids, Rebecca? They grew up. Life happened." I stood and walked to the window. "But maybe it's not too late to build something new. Like this foundation. Like everything." I turned back to him. "The foundation isn't just about helping women in crisis. It's about breaking cycles, changing stories." His phone buzzed, probably Oakley checking in. He ignored it. "I have conditions too," he said suddenly. I tensed. "The agreement is signed. Not about that. About us." He struggled to his feet. "If we're doing this, the transplant, the foundation, all of it, I want us to try fixing things, really fixing them. No more silence, no more pretending the past didn't happen." "That's not what I expected. Life's funny that way." He smiled weakly. "Nothing like organ failure to give you perspective." A knock at the door interrupted us. Mom poked her head in. "Everything okay in here?" "Show her." Blake nodded at the agreement. I handed Mom the signed papers. Her eyes widened as she read. "Oh, Blake, don't cry, Mom," he said. "This is a good thing. For everyone." "Does this mean—" She looked at me hopefully. "I'll call Dr. Marshall today," I said. "We can schedule the surgery as soon as possible." Mom pulled us both into a hug. For a moment, I was that little girl again, safe in her family's arms. Then Blake swayed slightly, reminding us all of the reality of our situation. "You should rest," I told him. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." "The foundation?" "That too. But I meant what you said about fixing things. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." He picked up the proposal one more time. "You know, this is really impressive. The comprehensive support system, the long-term planning. You've thought of everything." I had good teachers. Living in that shelter showed me exactly what women need to succeed. He nodded slowly. "I want to hear about it. All of it. Even the hard parts. especially the hard parts. Are you sure? It's not a pretty story. I'm sure. Maybe. He hesitated. Maybe understanding where you've been will help me be a better brother going forward. Mum wiped her eyes. My children finally acting like family again. We're not there yet, Mom, I cautioned. This is just the beginning. But it is a beginning, Blake said. That's more than we had yesterday. As if on cue, the storm broke outside. Rain pelted against the windows, but this time neither of us needed a pillow fort to feel safe. I should go, I said. There's a lot to organise. Rebecca? Blake called as I reached the door. Thank you. Not just for the transplant, but for showing me a better way to use my resources. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sometimes the hardest battles end not with a bang, but with a quiet moment of understanding. Outside, the rain had already begun to wash the city clean. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled every seat, cameras flashing as Blake approached the podium. Despite his illness, he stood straight, his voice clear and strong. 3 years ago, I made a terrible mistake, he began. My sister needed help, and I turned her away. Today, she's not only offering to save my life through a liver donation, but has shown me a better way to use my privilege and resources. I watched from the side, Kira squeezing my hand as Blake continued. That's why I'm proud to announce the launch of the Women's Crisis Foundation with an initial investment of $5 million. My sister Rebecca will serve as executive director, while I'll be joining the board to ensure this foundation becomes a lasting legacy. Questions erupted from the crowd. Mr. Blake, why this cause specifically? Because, he looked directly at me, sometimes we need to experience loss to understand what others have lost. My sister's journey from homelessness to success opened my eyes to the challenges women face in crisis situations. Another reporter stood. Rebecca, will this personal experience influence how the foundation operates? I stepped up to the podium, my heart racing. Absolutely. Every woman who comes through our doors will be treated with dignity and respect. We're not just offering handouts, we're providing tools for rebuilding lives. And the liver donation? Someone called out, is this connected? Blake touched my arm gently. The foundation and the transplant are separate issues. My sister's generosity in both matters has taught me valuable lessons about family and responsibility. After the conference, Jarvis met us in the green room. The response is overwhelming. Donations are already coming in. Really? I grabbed his tablet, scrolling through the numbers. This is incredible. People love a redemption story, Oakley said, helping Blake to a chair. Especially one that helps others. Mom and Dad arrived with coffee for everyone. We watched from home, Mom beamed. You both were wonderful. The surgery's scheduled for next week, Dad reminded us. Are you both ready? Blake and I exchanged looks. The past month of preparations had been intense. Medical tests, legal paperwork, and long conversations that often stretched into the night. We'd cried, argued, and slowly begun rebuilding what was broken. As ready as we'll ever be, I answered. Before that, Blake said, I have something to show you. He nodded to Oakley, who pulled out her laptop. What's this? I asked as she turned it toward me. The shelter, Blake said softly. I bought the building. You what? It'll be the foundation's first renovation project. State-of-the-art facilities, expanded capacity, everything you envisioned. I stared at the plans on screen, tears threatening. Blake. That's not all, Oakley added. Show her the rest. He pulled out a folder, similar to the one I'd presented with my demands weeks ago. Full funding for 5 years, not just the seed money. And I've reached out to my business network. We've got commitments for job placement programs, childcare facilities, legal aid. This is too much, I whispered. No, he took my hand. This is exactly enough. This is what family should have been doing all along. Kira cleared her throat. Don't forget the announcement. Right, Oakley smiled. We're postponing the wedding until after the surgery. And, Rebecca, I'd like you to be my maid of honor. The room spun slightly. Are you sure? Very sure. This family's been broken long enough. A knock at the door interrupted us, Dr. Marshall with final pre-surgery instructions. As she talked, I watched my family. Mom and Dad holding hands, Oakley supporting Blake, Kira and Jarvis taking notes about foundation details. "One more thing," Blake said after the doctor left. "I've been thinking about what you said about breaking cycles." "And?" "The foundation's nice, but it's not enough. I want to start a mentorship program too, for siblings, teaching them to support each other, break toxic patterns, like we're learning to do." "Exactly like that." Dad cleared his throat. "I think what you two are doing, it's bigger than just you now. It's going to help a lot of people." "That's the point," I said, "taking something broken and making it into something beautiful." My phone buzzed, a message from Janet, the social worker from my shelter days. "Saw the press conference. So proud of you. Your story will give hope to so many women." Blake read the message over my shoulder. "She's right, you know. This isn't just about us anymore." "It never was," I replied. "It was always about breaking the cycle, about turning pain into purpose." Outside, we could hear reporters still gathered, eager for more details about the foundation, the surgery, our story. But in that moment, surrounded by family, both blood and chosen, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from transforming them into allies. The autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee and fresh paint as I unlocked the doors of our first renovated shelter. Behind me, a small crowd gathered, staff members, volunteers, and, most importantly, the women who would call this place their temporary home. "Ready?" Kira asked, clipboard in hand. "Almost?" I straightened the plaque beside the door. "The Phoenix Center, a Women's Crisis Foundation project." Blake appeared at my side, looking healthier than he had in months. The transplant surgery had been successful, and his recovery was progressing well. Nice touch with the name. Well, we all know something about rising from ashes, don't we? The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but meaningful. As I gave the tour, I couldn't help but remember my first night in the old shelter. The fear, the uncertainty, the shame. "And this," I said, opening a door, "is our career center. Each resident gets personalized job training, interview coaching, and professional attire." A young woman raised her hand. "Is it true you stayed in the old shelter?" "I did. Right where the computer lab is now." I smiled at her. "What's your name?" "Maria. I lost everything in my divorce. My ex-husband's lawyer took everything. That's why we have legal aid on site now," Blake stepped forward, "plus emergency funds for cases exactly like yours." "The whole point," I added, "is that no one should have to choose between staying in a bad situation or facing homelessness." After the tour, I found Mom arranging donated supplies in the childcare center. "This is amazing, Rebecca. Though I still feel guilty, we didn't—" "Mom, we've talked about this. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it." "Your brother certainly has." She nodded toward where Blake was showing Oakley the mentorship program office. "He's different now, you both are." "The surgery changed us," I agreed. "But not just physically." Dad appeared with boxes of books for the library. "Remember when you used to read to Blake during storms? Now look at you two, helping others weather their own storms." The day flew by as we settled in our first group of residents. Each woman had a story, each one different but connected by the same thread of needing a second chance. As evening approached, I found Blake in the courtyard, sitting on a bench beneath the newly planted trees. "Penny for your thoughts?" I sat beside him. "Just thinking about that night I hung up on you." He touched his side where the surgery scar was still healing. How different things might have been if I'd made another choice. "We can't change that night, but look what we built because of it." "You built this," he corrected. "I just finally got out of your way." "No," I shook my head. "We built this. Your connections, your business expertise. We needed both our strengths to make it work." Oakley joined us, wedding planning folder in hand. The caterer called. "They want to know if we're still doing the donation thing instead of favors." "Absolutely," Blake said. Every guest's place setting will have a card showing a donation made in their name to the foundation. Speaking of donations, I pulled out my phone, showing them the latest figures. We've already helped 20 women find jobs, 15 secure housing, and 10 start their own businesses. Plus, the shelter's at full capacity, Oakley added, with a waiting list. Then we'll build more, Blake said simply. Whatever it takes. As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. A young girl, one of our residents' daughters, jumped at the sound. Hey, I called to her. Want to know a secret about storms? She nodded, moving closer. They're scary, but they make things grow. And sometimes, the most beautiful flowers come up after the hardest rain. Like the phoenix? She asked, pointing to our logo. Exactly like that. Later, as we locked up for the night, I paused in the entrance hall. The space that had once represented my lowest point now stood as a symbol of hope and renewal. You coming? Blake held the door. Mom's making dinner for everyone. Just taking it all in, I joined him. You know, when I first demanded your help with the foundation, I thought it was about revenge. And now? Now I know it was about healing, all of us. The storm finally broke as we drove home, but this time the thunder didn't sound threatening. It sounded like applause from the universe, celebrating not just what we'd built, but what we'd rebuilt. Our family, our purpose, our understanding of what it means to truly help others. Sometimes the best endings don't erase the past. They transform it into something powerful enough to change the future.
I am a 30-year-old married woman. I would like to talk about family issues that I have been dealing with since childhood. Background is somewhat complex and requires a lot of time to unravel. First of all, I have memories of always feeling like a troublemaker in my family. On the other hand, my older sister Catherine was always the eternal golden child for our family. She has blonde hair and blue eyes, looking a lot like our mother. In contrast, I inherited brown eyes and brown hair from my great-grandmother on my father's side. As you can see, I am the only one who is not blonde. Although I grew up in a family of 4, my childhood felt isolating. Rather than easing this feeling, my parents sometimes even accentuated it. For instance, they joked about doing a DNA test to see if I was really their child. It seemed like they were suggesting that joking about such a thing with a young child was perfectly normal, even though they laughed it off as just a joke. It was obvious who they favored. Catherine was treated like a cute, perfect angel. In comparison, I felt like an unnecessary presence to the family. From a young age, I realized there were things I could never attain. The support and affection Catherine received were hardly ever extended to me, and I was essentially isolated. This situation only worsened when I entered high school. My parents were proud of Catherine's beauty and popularity and seemed satisfied with that. Meanwhile, I had to find my own way to survive. I came to terms with not needing to focus on building a strong bond with my family and grew from that. It wasn't so much anger towards Catherine herself, but smoldering resentment towards our parents for doting on her and pushing me into the shadows. Therefore, I set my sights on attending college as a goal in my life. I believed that going to college would free me from my parents' control. I eagerly awaited that day. But reality was not so sweet. Due to financial issues, I couldn't afford to live on my own and had to commute from home to save money. Living at home was suffocating, and my mother always nagged me. Each time I was told how much my parents were sacrificing for me, as if I had other options, my frustration only grew. Eventually, I found a good job and was able to move out, but the pressure I had felt up to that point continued to linger. Then, 3 years ago, I was finally able to distance myself from my family by marrying Jason. However, I soon realized that my husband and his family highly valued family ties, which was a stark contrast to my values. Jason and his family kept emphasizing that family is family, no matter the flaws. As a result, I had no choice but to go along with their views. This led me to start sending money to my parents every month as financial support. Even though they didn't particularly appreciate or care for me, I continued out of a sense of guilt. Meanwhile, Catherine had married a wealthy man years ago and continued to lead a life where she got everything she wanted. This fact reminded me that she had always been the special one in the family. I had heard that her husband was very kind to her. I wasn't particularly surprised when it came out that Catherine had had an affair with an unknown man just a year into her marriage. However, her husband didn't just let it slide, and they divorced a few months ago. Since the divorce was due to the affair, he cleverly set the terms of the settlement so that Catherine was left with almost nothing. Since then, my mother has been making efforts to support Catherine and has been persistently asking for my help to share the burden. Catherine invited me to go on a vacation with her to heal from her post-divorce sadness. Of course, I refused. I couldn't understand her mentality of making others pay for her mistakes. After all, I have worked hard and built my own life. However, my husband Jason had a different opinion. It seems he has a soft spot for Catherine. She has always been attractive, and every time we visited my parents' house, Jason would show a comforting attitude towards her. Even when I expressed my discomfort, Jason dismissed it as just being caring, leading to several arguments. Then, just last month, I found out that Catherine had gone on her healing vacation. At that moment, I felt an indescribable shock. I knew neither Catherine nor our parents had enough money. Still, I suspected someone had financially supported her, though I wanted to believe otherwise. But I couldn't shake off a certain unease, so I quietly watched the situation. One day, I accidentally overheard Jason talking on the phone with my mother. I didn't hear the entire conversation clearly, but it was enough to understand the situation. Jason had been financially supporting Catherine without consulting me. Can you believe he did this without discussing it with me? Can you imagine this betrayal? The weight of the betrayal I felt is hard to express in words. He not only disregarded my feelings, but also acted against my wishes. For someone who has never shown me respect, filled with anger, I took a few days to calm down before finally deciding to confront him. I had expected more trustworthy behavior from him. After all, he is my husband. But what he said was an excuse that your mother strongly asked me to help. In short, he ended up funding my sister's vacation because he couldn't refuse my mother's request. And he added the usual excuse that families help each other. I never thought he would betray my trust like this. I was truly hurt. The least he could have done, even if I had disagreed, was to be honest with me about his decision. But it seemed he had no intention of telling me, unless I found out. Therefore, I was cold towards him for a while. I was deeply disappointed in his actions. I couldn't help but doubt whether he truly respected me as a wife and partner. I was deeply hurt that he completely disregarded my feelings, but I thought continuing to be cold would only worsen the situation. Recently, I've started to notice how often Jason is on his phone. Nearly always carries his phone around and seems guarded. He acts as if I'm not interested in him and only talks when necessary, perhaps thinking I haven't noticed anything, but I'm not that oblivious. I once again saw him talking on the phone with someone, and it was not my mother he was speaking to, but Catherine. I only caught part of their conversation, but it felt different from the usual in-law interactions. I won't go into details, but I could hear my husband arguing with her over the phone, and their manner of speaking didn't seem like the usual distance of in-laws, but rather more intimate. And so things started to change, little by little. It seemed very unnatural how much empathy he showed for her, and that he valued my family's opinions over my own thoughts. I began to feel that something bigger was going on without my knowledge. His excessive interest in my sister is abnormal. He has become more sympathetic towards her than ever before. Now it all seems to make sense. Although I don't have concrete proof, everything appears consistent to me. At that point, I felt I couldn't leave things as they were any longer, so I decided to seek help from a trustworthy lawyer. Without telling Jason or anyone else, I wanted to solve the problem at my own pace, and I was prepared to reveal everything, believing that my lawyer would support me. By the time dinner arrived, I was ready. I invited my parents and Catherine for a meal, and I included Jason as well. Thanks to the presence of my lawyer, I managed to stay calm. My parents and Catherine seemed to be enjoying themselves as usual, or they probably thought I was just whimsically calling people together for fun. As for Jason, he looked noticeably tense. He had probably predicted what I was going to do already. Honestly, he was the smartest and fastest one in the family to sense any kind of forewarning. After dinner, I brought up the topic of Catherine's vacation. Looking Jason straight in the eye, I pressed Catherine on how she had managed to pay for it. My parents, who had just been laughing happily with her minutes earlier, fell silent instantly. Jason appeared even more tense, so I stared at him and asked sarcastically, "What do you think?" Then I threw the real question at him. There was something between him and Catherine. He looked surprised, but tried to dodge the question by saying, "My judgment was distorted by family influence." My parents said he was just being kind and that I was overreacting. Meanwhile, Catherine said I was being paranoid and quite delusional, but I was not about to give up. My lawyer stepped in and made it clear that I was not backing down. Their upset reactions confirmed to me that their actions were betraying my trust. The presence of the lawyer, which my parents had not anticipated at all, must have further unsettled them. My parents tried to make me retract my statements by saying they were just being kind, but I told them to stop trying to manipulate me and to stop defending my sister, who has never shown me respect. I said I could no longer endure being treated as the family victim. Jason tried to say, "We're just helping because we're family," but I responded, "If you can't understand why I'm hurt, then you really don't understand me. At least I'm not foolish enough to not see what's going on." I told them that I would no longer be manipulated needlessly, and that I am currently considering my options. If he wants to defend my family and make me look weak, then he should stay with them, but I am taking measures to protect myself. I also told them that I am prepared to file for divorce. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly, and my mother and Catherine clearly showed their anger. Catherine accused me of crossing a line with her ex-husband, and acted as if she was the one deeply hurt. She behaved as if I had betrayed the family, but I have not. I understand fully. I realized that I could finally control my own life, but I also understood that they could not accept it. Now, I am ready to move on. I have ended my past of resisting myself for the family. I will no longer submit for people who have never shown me sincere compassion or respect. I barely speak to Jason now. In fact, he has left the house and is living with a cousin nearby. I told him that our marriage was over. Considering everything that has happened, no one can even bring themselves to talk about it. My trust in him is completely gone, and I am fully aware of that fact. I feel that I can never go back to how things were. I thought marrying him would allow me to build a new life with someone who cherishes me, but now I am faced with the harsh reality that this hope will never be fulfilled. That is enough for me. I regret not ending this relationship sooner. I am seriously considering cutting off all ties with my parents and Catherine. It might seem odd, but I plan to continue sending them money every month. The issues of being taught to devalue myself over many years are not something that can be resolved overnight. For my own consolation, I try to think that I no longer need to see my parents. It's just out of a sense of obligation. They are getting older. At least if they pass away, no one can blame me for abandoning my parents. They will take my money, and I accept that as compensation for my peace of mind. If I stop sending money, when my parents pass away, other relatives will surely blame me. Understanding that continuing to involve them in my life is nothing but suffering is painful. But I get it. Someday, they might realize how much pain they have caused me. But I can't keep waiting for that moment. Now is the time to prioritize my happiness. Talking directly with Jason and having individual conversations with family members, I was able to experience a moment of healing for the first time. Jason left the house immediately after I told him I had decided to divorce. It was a great relief for me. At least I can have a time without having to see a face I don't want to see every day. I was able to take a step toward regaining myself. My parents and Catherine continued their days as if nothing had happened, because I hadn't said anything or made it public. Although I couldn't even take a rest, my parents are still taking money from me. Some friends had suggested that I include an infidelity clause in a prenuptial agreement before marrying Jason. I am grateful for that now. However, having a prenuptial agreement doesn't make it easy to demand anything from Jason. The problem is that there is no clear evidence that he cheated. I have always had suspicions about him and Catherine, but there's no evidence that he cheated just because he put effort into helping her. Honestly, I no longer have the energy to fight. I'm at my physical and mental limits. I just want to distance myself a little from the toxicity of my family. Maybe he wasn't physically unfaithful, perhaps just influenced by my mother and Catherine. Honestly, it's unclear. In my heart, I don't want to face the reality that he could have betrayed me. However, an event made me doubt everything again. A few days ago, I received a message on social media from Catherine's ex-husband. We weren't close, so I was surprised to get a message from him. His message was brief and vague, simply stating, "Please check." Honestly, I was terrified to accept it. I'm meeting him soon, and I'm anxious about what unbearable things he might say. And what if the issue is more serious than I anticipated? Despite my efforts to recover, I feel like everything is about to collapse again. I've decided to meet him in a public place just in case. I asked a few close friends to come with me. I don't have the courage to face this alone. I don't know what awaits, but now I need to find out. To move forward, I must clarify this now. However, what he told me was worse than I expected. Since then, I've been emotionally devastated. But despite the difficulty in articulating this, I feel I must speak out for my sake and for others. Firstly, Catherine's ex-husband began to suspect something when he accidentally found evidence of an affair between Jason and Catherine. After some deliberation and seeing how my family treated me, he decided I had the right to know the truth. He handed me some documents. Included were screenshots of text messages Catherine had sent a few months ago. These were related to the amount Jason had paid. It was no coincidence. It was not out of kindness or misguided sympathy, but rather a financial arrangement to keep her quiet. Jason was pressuring Catherine to keep silent, to prevent her from telling me about the affair. My husband, whom I trusted, was paying my sister to protect their dirty secret instead of our relationship. To make matters worse, I was told by Catherine's ex-husband that my parents had known about the affair between my husband and Catherine for a long time. I had moments of doubt, but now everything felt clear. I regretted not noticing the signs that were there. After hearing this truth, I spent hours crying in the car about the betrayal by my family. The shock was tremendous. I didn't know where to start or how to deal with my husband, sister, and parents, but if they thought I could easily accept this fact, they were greatly mistaken. I'm done being treated this way. I've decided there's no need to feel sympathy for them anymore. Previously, I had ignored him due to a lack of evidence to move forward. But now that I have solid proof, I intend to use every available means to ensure he can't escape. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, he originally didn't have many rights, but now I want him to take responsibility for his actions. After meeting with Catherine's ex-husband, I've been in considerable turmoil. I've been unable to eat or sleep properly, betrayed by my family and soon-to-be ex-husband. It wasn't an easy journey, but I've slowly been making sense of the situation. First, I decided to completely cut off financial ties with my parents. I've stopped giving them allowances, covering their bills, and feeling any obligation toward their actions. Given what I've learned, I can't entertain any expectations from them again. Of course, they did not take this well. My mother and Catherine seemed especially unable to accept this fact. Then they sent me emails and messages. The second they didn't back down, I contacted the police. My lawyer promptly proceeded with a restraining order application. Now they can't legally come near me or contact me. So far, they haven't made anything public. They seem to have finally understood that if they try to contact me again, I can further destroy their lives. Thanks to the restraining order, they already feel significant humiliation, and they are embarrassed for others to know. Hopefully that will continue. The evidence I have isn't strong enough to prevent Jason from dragging out various proceedings. He's probably hoping that by taking his time, I will get tired and compromise. But I won't give in this time. Ignoring it is no longer an option. Considering what he has done, I can't let things stay as they are. I'm exhausted, but remembering how he lied and betrayed me daily, I keep my resolve strong while feeling overwhelmed. Supported by a few old friends, I've been rediscovering hobbies and interests that entertain me. It's never easy, and there are tough days, but I keep encouraging myself to get out of this difficult situation. This year has been a long and challenging journey, but ultimately, supported by the prenuptial agreement and evidence of his infidelity, I was able to achieve victory. There were moments when Jason seemed to feel some regret over what he lost, but remembering the past betrayals and lies, those feelings quickly faded. The last I heard, Jason was trying to recover by working multiple jobs and immersing himself in work. At the time, I thought I would never recover from such deep betrayal, but since then, I've been valuing my feelings. Needless to say, therapy brought significant changes, teaching me how to maintain boundaries, identify harmful behaviors, and prioritize my health. Thus, I was able to rediscover what truly brings me happiness. I was kicked out of my home at the age of 18. First, I really need some advice. I thought I grew up in an ideal family. My parents struggled for 4 years to have children before I was born. Just when they were about to give up, my mother got pregnant, which was like a miracle for the family, I'm told. My parents were very happy to learn of my birth and had many hopes and plans for the future. However, according to what my grandmother told me, this happiness did not last long. Deep down, my parents were not satisfied with each other. They constantly argued fiercely, and the disputes continued even after my mother became pregnant, arguing about the same things every day. My mother strongly condemned my father's gambling habit, while my father blamed her for continuing to drink alcohol all day, even during pregnancy. My father promised to stop gambling if my mother would stop drinking. My mother agreed to this proposal at first, but later broke the promise. My father discovered that my mother was secretly hiding bottles of alcohol around the house and continuing to drink. Believing that my mother's drinking was negatively affecting not just him but also me, my father gave her an ultimatum. It was for her to stop drinking or face divorce. However, my mother refused to stop drinking. She was very upset by the situation, and according to my grandmother, in a fit of rage, my mother hurled abuse at my father and threw a nearby pair of scissors at him. As a result, my father was injured in the eye and had to be taken to the hospital. The doctor diagnosed a partial tear in the cornea, but fortunately, it was treatable, and he avoided complete loss of vision. This incident caused great fear in my mother, and she sincerely asked my father for forgiveness. My father chose not to make a big deal out of the problem and did not sue my mother, as she promised to change. I heard that when I was born, my parents were very happy and tried hard to raise me. According to my grandmother, this peace did not last long for my parents. One day, when my father came home from work, he found me crying loudly in the children's room. Meanwhile, my mother passed out on the sofa, drunk. Seeing this scene, my father became furiously angry and confronted my mother. He blamed the situation, but my mother excused herself, saying, "The stress of parenting is too much, and I just had a little drink." At that time, my father considered reporting the situation to Child Protective Services, but ultimately he refrained. I think things might have been better if he had reported it then. Afterward, my mother changed her behavior a bit, but it was just a way for her to hide it better. In the morning, when my father left for work, my mother would drink and sleep until the evening, making sure it wasn't noticeable. I must have gone many days hungry. As a result, my health gradually deteriorated, and I visibly lost weight. When my grandmother visited, the house was a mess, dishes piled up in the sink unwashed, the floor dirty and sticky, and unsanitary. When my grandmother saw me, I was in dirty diapers and clothes, and my hair was unkempt. When my grandmother pointed out the state of the house and my condition to my mother, she immediately became defensive, saying, "Don't interfere in my business." Moreover, on another day when my grandmother came, she noticed my mother was clearly drunk in the middle of the day. When my grandmother confronted her, my mother couldn't respond properly and kept laughing, talking nonsense. My mother then openly showed her anger, repeatedly insisting it was nothing. At that time, my grandmother decided she could not leave things as they were and stayed at the house all day to take care of me. Later, when my father returned from work, my grandmother asked if she could take care of me for a while. It was to give my mother time to enter a rehabilitation facility. My mother opposed this, but my father quickly agreed to my grandmother's suggestion. I think my father agreed with my grandmother's words because he felt more support was needed in the house while my mother was undergoing treatment. Thus, I ended up living with my grandmother for several months. The days I spent with my grandmother were truly happy and irreplaceable. Every day, she bathed me and read me books before bed. She also made delicious meals and took me to the park. I first learned then that these are things parents should do for their children. When I wanted to play, my grandmother never got angry or yelled like my mother did. Even when I accidentally broke a dish, my grandmother didn't hit me but gently scolded me. The time I lived with my grandmother was a precious time when I could feel completely at ease. Gradually, my grandmother became like a mother to me, and she has been a treasured support ever since. I can only feel truly grateful for my grandmother. I can't imagine how I would have overcome those difficult days without my grandmother. My father also made time to visit me often. Since then, he looked forward to seeing me very much. My mother also often expressed how much she wanted to see me and how she hoped to recover quickly so she could hug me again. To be honest, I was a bit resistant to returning to my parents' home. I wanted to continue living with my grandmother forever, if that was possible. However, a few months later, my mother finally succeeded in abstaining from alcohol and earned her AA sobriety chip. The first thing she did was drive to my grandmother's house to see me. When I reunited with my mother after many months, it felt unreal, as if I were meeting a stranger. She seemed healthier than before. After she discussed things with my grandmother, I was told that I would return to my parents' home. No matter how much I cried or resisted, my mother insisted, "I am your real parent, and we must live together." Living with my parents brought back many unpleasant memories, and returning to that life was very hard for me. The move seemed to place a great burden on both my mind and body. Despite being only 5 years old, I lost my appetite and suffered from nausea for days. As a result, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. Afterward, my parents did everything they could to help me. By receiving family therapy together, we slowly overcame our past pain and moved forward. My feelings gradually stabilized, and a sense of calm returned to my heart. My parents stopped fighting violently as before, my mother completely quit drinking, and they both tried to value their time as a family. My mother began to engage with becoming a better parent, and she started building a new trust relationship with my father. My father also reduced his work hours to spend more time with us. However, one afternoon, when I returned home from school with my father, we encountered an unexpected scene. My mother was in an intimate situation with an unknown man inside the house. We witnessed everything on the spot, and it became a significant trial for our family again. We saw their misconduct and clearly witnessed their actions. At that moment, I was deeply shocked, and my father was lost for words for a while. My mother and her lover tried to hide in a panic, but during this, my father's face turned red with embarrassment. He told me to go upstairs, and during that time, he confronted my mother and her lover. Terrified, the lover rushed out of the house. From inside the house, we could hear my parents arguing fiercely. My mother, being self-centered, excused her infidelity by telling my father that the pressure to be perfect troubled her, and being with her lover made her feel like a normal person. She also expressed to my father that she always felt he would be disappointed, no matter what she did. My father called her a coward and immediately told her to leave the house. At that moment, my mother desperately pleaded, arguing to my father that he shouldn't be so cruel. She argued that they should repair their marriage for my sake. That night, while my parents were fighting intensely, my grandmother came to pick me up. She said a few words to my mother but didn't interfere much. For the next 2 weeks, while my parents sorted out their issues at home, I stayed at my grandmother's house. My mother called every day, showing great concern for me. Looking back, I understand that she was only thinking of herself, without considering anyone else. Whether my father truly loved my mother or had just become too accustomed to a dysfunctional relationship, I don't know, but ultimately he decided to continue living with her under certain conditions. They were to undergo marriage counseling, but despite my father's decision, I could no longer see my mother as before. After witnessing her with another man, I felt like I had completely lost respect for her. For us, it was a situation as bad as one could imagine. Then, just 3 months later, my father was diagnosed with stomach cancer. One day, he complained of severe stomach pain and collapsed at work. He was then taken to the hospital, where his rapidly deteriorating health condition was revealed, and he was told that immediate treatment was necessary. Thus, my father began a life of chemotherapy and enforced rest. He took time off work and was forced into a battle with cancer. My father had some savings, and my grandmother willingly helped my mother, but my mother was not satisfied with that. She constantly complained about the costs of treatment and the financial burden it imposed. My father advised her to find a part-time job and promised to return to work and support her again once he recovered. With limited options, my mother started working as a waitress at a local restaurant. The job involved long hours, and she worked late into the night. During this period, my grandmother drove my father to and from the hospital. The son of a neighbor living next door, who was about the same age as me, offered to drive me to school every day. It was a great help for us. This is how I became close with Sean, who lived in the house next door. We have been friends for a long time and practically grew up together, so Sean's parents knew my family well. Since my parents often had fierce arguments, Sean's parents started inviting me over for lunch and dinner when Sean and I became friends. My father had no problem with it, and neither did I. However, my mother always scolded me for spending too much time at their house, saying they treated me like a mere charity case and like a broken toy. Looking back, she might have had a point, but as I spent more time with them, I gradually realized that they treated me like a member of their family. In fact, once Sean's mom learned that I loved apple pie, she made sure to bake one every weekend. Sean's dad taught me how to play basketball, and we practiced late into the night outside their garage. Over time, they became like a second family to me. Therefore, it was no surprise to anyone when Sean and I started dating. Gradually, Sean brought many wonderful things into my life, and I am grateful every day that he has overcome many challenges and is still my boyfriend. I come from a complex family environment, and unfortunately, my mother has never truly trusted Sean or his family. Yet, Sean and his family showed me love and compassion, regardless of my mother's discomfort. A year after my father's battle with cancer began, he was told by the doctors that the chemotherapy was no longer effective and that he had a short time left. This news was a huge shock to our family. I was still young at the time, and I remember crying all night long, thinking about my father. I could not understand why I had to lose the only parent who loved me unconditionally. Accepting the grief was extremely difficult. During his last few months, my father spent as much time as possible with our family. One morning, when my father didn't wake up no matter how much I called him, I immediately felt something was wrong. I quickly informed my mother, who then called 911. The moment the paramedics announced his death, the pain I felt was indescribable. The only small comfort was that my father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Overwhelmed by grief, I continued to scream and refused to let them take my father's body away, until my mother finally restrained me. When my grandmother arrived, I felt a bit more at peace. At that time, I could not fully comprehend the depth of grief she was carrying. The funeral went smoothly, but what really shocked me was when the lawyer came to read my father's will. It was then revealed that my father had left all his property to me. My mother was surprised by this news and asked the lawyer to verify the documents. My father understood what kind of person my mother was and left the house and some assets to me after the chemotherapy, presumably to ensure I could start a new life. However, my mother was not convinced and repeatedly asked the lawyer if there was any way to legally dispute that the house belonged to her, as she was the wife. But since my father had legally changed his name quite a while ago, there was no question about his mental state legally, and my mother's claim had no basis. When asked by my mother what I intended to do with the house, I replied that I wanted to stay there. My mother suggested selling the house and moving to a better place. However, I had just lost my father, and the house was the only place where I could feel his presence, so I declined her proposal. In the end, my mother had few options and continued to live in the house. I noticed that my mother seemed very disappointed at that time, but I did not think much about it. However, within 2 months, I was informed by my mother that she was in love with a man named Kevin. It was the man she had an affair with years ago. I was very upset with my mother for wanting to meet him. My mother explained that she had met Kevin again after many years, and she started claiming he was just an old friend. After my father's death, I felt like my mother was always lying to me. They were very close, and seeing them kiss each other made me feel even more uneasy. This incident disturbed me even more. Thinking back on the nights when my mother returned home late, I felt even stronger emotions. Before, I had seen my mother as my ideal role model. However, upset by her words, I told her that he was not necessary in my life, that if she intended to marry, she should move out, that it would be better to live alone than with a man she had an affair with while my father was alive. My mother threatened me, saying that I was still a minor and had no options. Unfortunately, she was right, and I had no choice. After a while, she married Kevin. Furthermore, my mother soon became pregnant with Kevin's child. As if to say it wasn't enough reason for me to dislike him, he was very controlling and would call my mother every time she finished work, and if she was even a minute late coming home, he would call again. He tried to do the same with me, but I quickly rejected it. I made it clear to him that he is not my real father, and that I can go anywhere I want by my own will. By the way, I have the keys to the house, so he can't lock me out. At this point, my mother hadn't done anything special for me. I felt a little sad that my only parent didn't care about me at all. However, my grandmother and Sean's parents supported me and encouraged me until I graduated. Later, while I was preparing to go to a party with friends, my mother came to my room and said that since I was an adult now, I should take more responsibility for the house. I always washed my own things and had thought about and applied to college on my own. Confused, I asked my mother what she meant. Eventually, I was able to attend a reputable local university, so I didn't need to waste money on distant accommodation. However, I wanted to buy a car to make it easier to commute to classes. I thought about asking my mother for help to buy a car, but when I brought it up, she and Kevin immediately became furious. Kevin accused me of already having too much support from them as they both had limited income. Furthermore, my mother and Kevin started renovating the house on their own, interfering with my plans to buy a car. During this time, I said nothing and just sat there quietly. Sean understood that I was upset about the situation with Kevin. He said that as a parent, he should consider his responsibilities. Then, Kevin decided to convert my room into a room for the baby they were expecting. He continued, telling me that I should move out and start living on my own, which left me speechless. Kevin and my mother told me they could no longer let me live in the house. My mother agreed and said I should move out to pay rent and live independently. A few hours later, they told me to leave the house. So I went to consult a lawyer to check my legal rights. The lawyer confirmed that my father's will was very clear and explained that my mother and Kevin had no right to control the house, advising me to issue a formal eviction notice. With the notice in hand, I confronted my mother and Kevin with my grandmother. My grandmother is petite, but was not intimidated by tall Kevin at all. She stared at him and said she had decided to sell the house and instructed them to vacate within 30 days. When shown the notice, they couldn't argue. I handed them the notice signed by the lawyer, emphasizing that the 30-day period must be adhered to, and explained the legal actions that would follow if they did not comply. Kevin, red-faced with anger, snatched the document from me. I stood firm and told my mother about the years she had drowned in alcohol, telling me to fend for myself as a child. I told her that she was the one who should be independent. My mother, with nowhere else to go, begged me to let her stay, but I firmly told her I wouldn't let them do as they pleased any longer. I also told my grandmother and me that we would stay in the house and ensure they moved out within 30 days. Kevin and my mother were unprepared for this and tried to argue, but I did not budge. I reaffirmed to them that I was the owner of the house and they were merely guests. If they were not willing to follow my instructions, I would have all their belongings moved to a motel. The reason I opted for a 30-day grace period was on the advice of my lawyer, to ensure they could not sue me if this issue went to court. I also stated that I was willing to repay the costs incurred in the renovation if they could provide appropriate invoices verified by a lawyer, as I wanted to be fair when selling the house. People have asked why my grandmother and I stayed there with my mother and Kevin, and the reason was to prevent them from refusing to leave or illegally occupying the property without a valid reason when the 30-day legal notice expires. I even outmaneuvered them eventually by moving all their belongings to the porch and locking them out of the house when my mother went for an ultrasound. When they returned and called the police could do nothing. I calmly showed the documents proving I was the legal owner of the house and told them that Kevin and my mother did not even have the keys to the house. After verifying this, the police said they could go to court if they wished. Kevin argued against my points and verbally abused me. Then he began to walk away, yelling loudly. One of the officers warned him that he was a danger to me. Eventually, my mother and Kevin were detained. I was deeply satisfied that I could exclude them from my property and make them understand this fact. After that, I installed surveillance cameras all around the property. Following a meeting with the real estate agent, house viewings were set to start the following week. Afterward, my mother and Kevin tried to contact me several times through friends and relatives, wanting to apologize, but I refused all their messages. After they were taken by the police, I heard they were living in an apartment on the other side of the city. Even after the baby was born, my mother tried several times to reconcile with me. She sent messages with photos of the baby, saying, "I want you to meet the baby," but I knew her actions were calculated. Following my grandmother's advice, I decided not to respond to any contact from my mother or Kevin. Their presence was a source of past trauma for me, and to move forward in my new life, I needed to completely distance myself from them. The house sold for more than expected, and I was able to secure funds for my university tuition and new life. Sean's parents supported me in finding a new apartment. Recently, I heard that my mother has been struggling with alcohol problems again. Her relationship with Kevin hasn't seemed to be going well either. However, honestly, it's no longer my concern. The path my mother chose after my father's death was her own choice, and I am not responsible for it. Currently, I am seriously engaging with Sean and working towards my dreams every day. On weekends, I cook with my grandmother at her house and help with gardening. This is my new idea of family. My relationship with my mother may have ended, but I feel it was the first step towards moving forward into the future. Sometimes I think of my father. I believe he left me the house so I could take back my life. I continue to move forward, hoping to fulfill his wish. On a certain April morning, as flower petals danced through the air, my life changed dramatically. My name is Jane Hansen. That day, I was celebrating my 20th birthday. It should have been full of vibrant celebrations. However, my morning began with the cries of my daughter, Emma. Emma, just 1 year old, had woken up in the bed next to mine, craving milk. I hurriedly got up and picked her up. The warmth from her small body always gives me the strength to live. The feel of her soft skin, the sweet scent characteristic of babies. All of it was the reason for my existence. "Good morning, Emma." I gently kissed her head. Her soft black hair was just like mine. However, those gentle brown eyes were undoubtedly inherited from her father. Those eyes sometimes cause pain in my heart, but seeing Emma's innocent smile makes even that pain feel precious. I've tried to stop thinking about Emma's father. Remembering him always brings a tight sensation in my chest. As soon as he learned of my pregnancy, he disappeared. He changed his contact information and deleted his social media accounts. It was as if he wanted to erase his entire existence. I remember the last day I saw him, his expression as we sat across from each other in a cafe. The color drained from his face when I told him I was pregnant, and the seemingly eternal silence after he said he needed some time and left. Back then, I was 18 years old, a high school student about to enter university. Full of dreams and hopes for the future, the world seemed filled with possibilities. I was set to study literature and dreamed of becoming a writer. On weekends, I would go to the movies with friends, and on weekdays, I'd immerse myself in books at the library. I was just an ordinary high school girl. When I discovered I was pregnant, my parents' reaction was as expected, or perhaps even more intense than I thought. Shameful. "You have tarnished our family's reputation." My mother's words still echo in my ears. I remember the heavy atmosphere in the living room at dusk that day. My father's deep sighs and my mother's trembling voice. My mother repeated the same words over and over while crying, as if trying to convince herself. How could this happen? Her voice was as cold as an autumn night's breeze. On the other hand, my sister Alyssa was different. She was 16 at the time. Bright and lively, she was my parents' favorite. As the captain of the cheerleading team and an excellent student, she was the daughter my parents always wanted. She didn't say much about my pregnancy, she just occasionally looked at me with sympathetic eyes. In her gaze, there was a mix of pity and a sense of relief, as if to say, "I am different." In the 2 years since I had Emma, I had been desperate. I attended community college during the day and worked at a store at night. I cut back on sleep to study and somehow managed to obtain a childcare qualification. During this time, my mother mostly took care of Emma. When I returned from my night shifts, my mother would be holding Emma, looking exhausted. Sometimes I saw her gently singing lullabies. During those moments, I could feel the love in her. However, my mother's kindness always had thorns. While caring for Emma, she never held back her critical words. "This happened because you were reckless." She would say this as she changed Emma's diaper. Her hands were gentle, but her words were sharply piercing. "Do you realize the trouble you're causing us?" She would sigh as she warmed up the milk. That sigh weighed heavily on my heart. If only you could have been more like Alyssa. After putting Emma to bed, my mother would often mutter those words. They seeped into my heart like a curse. I heard such words almost daily. In my room, I would often cry while holding Emma, listening to her soft breathing. I wished to provide her with a better environment. However, that wish always crashed against the walls of reality. Economic independence still seemed like a distant dream. One morning, after finishing feeding Emma her milk, I heard my mother's voice from downstairs. "Jane, it's time for breakfast." There was an unusual tension in her voice, a strange sound mixed with anticipation and anxiety. I carried Emma downstairs. In the living room, my parents awaited me with grave expressions. There was no breakfast on the table. Instead, a few documents were laid out. "Sit down." My father's voice resonated unusually low. I did as instructed and sat on the sofa, holding Emma on my lap. Perhaps sensing the tense atmosphere, she was quieter than usual. "Jane, we need to talk," my mother began, her hands trembling slightly. "It's about Alyssa." At that moment, my heart leaped. The crying from Alyssa's room last night, the excited voices of my parents that lasted into the night, the sounds of footsteps back and forth in the hallway made me think. Something significant had happened. Time seemed to slow down as I waited for my mother's next words. "Alyssa is pregnant." I choked. My sister was only 18 and she got pregnant at the same age I was. The coincidence seemed like a cruel twist of fate. Who is the father? My question almost whispered out. The already heavy air in the room seemed to thicken. "It's Chris, the son of the real estate company president." My mother's voice had a hint of pride. This change in her tone caused a sharp pain in my heart. Chris Baker, the only son of a well-known wealthy family in the area. His father's real estate business was one of the most successful enterprises in the region. I had heard that Alyssa started dating him in high school. I had met him at the school's cultural festival. He's a tall, smart-looking young man. The way he held Alyssa by the waist and proudly looked at her, they indeed made a picture. Perfect couple. At the time, I was genuinely happy for my sister's happiness. But now, that memory brought up complex emotions. "So," my father cleared his throat, "we've made a decision." I had no idea then that this decision would change the fate of Emma and me. Alyssa and the baby will live here. Chris will join them. This statement felt odd. Although there are indeed 4 rooms in this house, all are currently in use. My parents' bedroom, Alyssa's room, the room for Emma and me, and a former guest room used as storage. And so, Jane. My father's voice was heavy. "I'm sorry, but I need you and Emma to leave." A loud noise seemed to ring overhead, and for a moment, everything appeared white. A ringing in my ears, and the room's atmosphere felt as if it had frozen. "What?" My voice trembled weakly. Emma looked up at me anxiously. Her small hand gripped my sweater tightly. "She's giving birth to a boy? Our grandson?" My mother said excitedly. There was a heat in her voice that I had never heard before. "He will continue the family line. He must be raised in the proper environment." My mother's eyes shone unnaturally bright. I could vividly imagine my parents' reaction when they learned Alyssa's baby was a boy. I doubted my own ears. But Emma is also. Emma is a girl. My mother stated coldly. There was no trace of kindness in her voice. "Besides, you are an unmarried mother. It affects our reputation." At that moment, everything became clear. To my parents, Emma and I had always been a disgrace. In contrast, Alyssa's pregnancy was a blessing because the father came from a wealthy family, and the child to be born was a boy. Emma coughed softly. That sound snapped me back to reality. I had to protect this child. I had to secure her future. How soon do we need to leave? My voice was surprisingly calm. Today. My father answered. Chris is moving in tomorrow. It felt like a nightmare. Yet, it was reality. Okay. I stood up and embraced Emma. She, unaware of the situation, smiled innocently. That smile nearly tore my heart into pieces. But I couldn't cry in front of her. That morning, I frantically packed our belongings. As I stuffed the essentials into cardboard boxes, tears streamed down my face. Yet, these were not merely tears of sadness. They contained anger, disappointment, and strangely, a sense of liberation. Living in this house, always mindful of others' eyes, those days were now ending. Though the reality was frightening, it also marked a new beginning. Alyssa remained shut in her room. Occasionally, I could hear her crying through the door. The sound of crying seemed to contain complex emotions. Was it guilt, regret, or just hormonal changes due to her pregnancy? I couldn't comprehend my sister's heart. Was she suffering from this situation, or just stressed from the pregnancy? Inside me, sisterly love clashed fiercely with the feelings of betrayal. In the afternoon, I called my father's sister, my Aunt Susan. My heart pounded as the phone rang. She had always been my ally. Every Christmas, she knitted handmade sweaters for me, and never missed sending a handwritten letter on my birthday. She's a truly warm person. What? My aunt raised her voice in anger over the phone. It carried shock, anger, and deep sadness. Are those two sane? Aunt, I stuttered, and she quickly replied without hesitation. Come to my house right away. There is always a room ready for you and Emma. Her words made me tear up again, this time with relief. As warm tears streamed down my cheeks, for the first time, I felt a glimpse of hope. On the other side of the phone, my aunt continued. I'm coming to get you right now with my car. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just pack what you need. Her voice lacked its usual calmness, replaced by a resolute strength. But the luggage. Don't worry. We can come back for it later. Right now, your and Emma's safety is the priority. After hanging up, I took a deep breath. By evening, I had loaded the last of our belongings into the car. My parents saw us off with a gaze as if they were looking at strangers. They stood at the doorstep, their eyes seemingly empty. My mother opened her mouth several times but ultimately said nothing. Her expression seemed to carry a tinge of regret, although it could have been my imagination. My father crossed his arms and watched us leave with the demeanor of someone seeing off a contractor, avoiding eye contact. Goodbye. At my words, they just nodded silently. Emma sat in the back seat of my aunt's car, clutching a new stuffed animal she had bought along the way. You need new friends for a new beginning. At that kindness, I nearly choked up. On the way to my aunt's house, I pulled out my smartphone, trembling, and opened the social media app. Years of pent-up thoughts burst forth in a flood of words. Like a dam breaking, releasing all the emotions I had held back. Today, I was thrown out of my childhood home. The reason? My parents needed a room for their grandson. I have a 1-year-old daughter. Being an unmarried mother, I was always a disgrace to my family. Every day, I was confronted with this fact and forced to apologize as if my very existence was a mistake. However, the moment my sister became pregnant with the son of a wealthy family, everything changed. We were evicted for the sake of the heir to continue the family line with just a day's notice. They didn't hesitate to kick out their own daughter and granddaughter. To those reading this post, know that such discrimination still exists in the 21st century. Parents who would kick out their own daughter and granddaughter because she is a girl and the mother is unmarried still exist. But this is not the end. It is a new beginning. Emma and I have a true family now, Blood does not always signify love, and I have learned what a real family is. The moment I published the post, I felt a profound sense of release. I had unleashed all the emotions I had suppressed for so long to the world. At the same time, I felt a fierce anxiety, but there was no turning back now. "Are you okay?" my aunt asked gently. Her voice was filled with deep understanding and support. "Yes," I nodded slightly. "I feel like I've finally been able to express my true feelings." Emma's cheerful laughter sounded from the back seat, giving me courage. We arrived at my aunt's house as the sun was setting. "You did well to come." My aunt embraced me and Emma tightly. In her arms, I could feel the day's tension slowly melt away. Her body carried the familiar scent of soap, the smell of a safe place. "This is your new home now." Those words carried a definite weight. The house was remarkably tidy inside. My aunt must have prepared the room in anticipation of our arrival. In the corner of the living room, a small baby crib was already set up with clean sheets. The table was set with a warm dinner, its aroma filling the room. That night, I talked for a long time with my aunt. After Emma fell asleep, we sat around the kitchen table discussing everything: my parents' attitudes, Alyssa's pregnancy, and all my feelings up to now. Speaking aloud helped the fog inside my chest begin to take shape. "Your dad has always been bound by old traditions, but I never imagined it would go this far." Her voice mixed disappointment in her brother with deep affection for us. "Just because a boy is being born." My aunt shook her head. "To still hold such views in these times." The next morning, my social media post had generated an unexpected amount of reaction. Notifications flooded the screen of my smartphone, thousands of shares, tens of thousands of empathetic comments, words of encouragement from strangers, and confessions from people who had similar experiences. Did I really do the right thing? I voiced my anxiety while preparing breakfast. "It's become so big." "You did the right thing," my aunt said firmly. "Nothing changes unless someone speaks up." That afternoon, my grandfather called. "Jane, is it really true?" His voice trembled with anger. The usual calm was gone, replaced by intense emotion. "Yes," I replied quietly. "Everything is true." "I see." After a long silence, my grandfather spoke in a heavy voice. "Tomorrow, your grandmother and I will come. Let us hear everything." The next day, my grandparents visited my aunt's house. As soon as he entered, my grandfather went straight to Emma. Initially wary, she quickly warmed up when he smiled gently at her. "Our wealth has been maintaining that house," he said while holding Emma on his lap. His voice carried a deep remorse. "And yet, they drive out their own daughter and granddaughter." My grandparents were wealthy. The house my parents lived in had actually been purchased with my grandfather's help, a fact I hadn't known until then. The large house, the well-maintained garden, all were supported by my grandfather. Perhaps our silence was to blame, my grandmother said quietly, tears glistening in her eyes. "We've spoiled them too much, if they won't accept you." My grandfather stated firmly, Emma dozing off on his lap with her new stuffed animal. "The entire inheritance will go to you and Susan." Those words transformed the situation. His voice carried a resolute decision. This was not merely a threat, but a clear statement of intent. "Dad." My aunt choked up. "Susan, I trust you to use it correctly." My grandfather continued, "For Jane and Emma." My grandmother nodded silently. "It is difficult for us to make such a decision," my grandfather said, gently stroking Emma's hair. "But sometimes tough decisions are necessary." From that night on, calls from my parents were incessant. Initially I ignored them, but gradually the frequency increased. "Jane, let's talk." My mother's voice was more distraught than I had ever heard it before. "There's been a misunderstanding. We're family after all." There was a clear desperation in her voice. They must have realized that my grandfather's decision would directly impact their lifestyle. "You just want the inheritance, don't you?" I said, and a silence fell over the other end of the phone. That silence confirmed that my words had accurately hit their true intentions. I could hear my mother's breathing grow ragged over the phone. "Why would you say that?" Her voice trembled. "Because it's true, isn't it?" My voice remained surprisingly calm. "When you threw me and Emma out, you didn't seem to have any qualms." I also received a message from Alyssa. A long text from my sister appeared on the screen. "Jane, I'm sorry. I didn't know anything. Our parents told me you wanted to leave on your own." The smartphone in my hand trembled slightly. Perhaps part of Alyssa's words were true. Maybe our parents hadn't told her the truth. However, that didn't excuse her indifference. I took a deep breath and slowly typed a response. "Your son isn't to blame, but neither were Emma and I. Yet you just watched in silence." There was no reply from Alyssa after that. Suddenly, Emma jumped onto my lap. Her small hand touched my cheek. Her warmth brought me back to reality. A week later, the situation took an unexpected turn. Alyssa suddenly left our parents' house. A friend of my mother's from the neighborhood brought the news. Early in the morning, a large car parked in front of the house, and Alyssa's belongings were loaded into it. Our parents tried to stop her, but they were helpless as Chris's father was there to assist her. "I've decided to live with Chris." Alyssa called me that afternoon. Her voice had a clarity I hadn't heard in a long time. "What our parents are doing is wrong. I don't want to be part of it." Her words stirred complex feelings within me. Her decision was commendable, certainly requiring courage. But why hadn't she realized sooner? Why hadn't she spoken up when Emma and I were being driven out? "Alyssa." My voice cracked a little. "Why now?" "Jane, I've been thinking a lot. Since that day, I've had sleepless nights." Alyssa started sobbing over the phone. "Chris's parents have accepted us," she continued. "They don't care whether it's a boy or a girl. That's how it should be." A month later, as promised, my grandparents officially revised their will. The inheritance for my parents was removed, and instead, the rights were transferred to Aunt Susan and me. This news reached me via an angry call from my father. "What have you done?" His voice pierced through the phone. "Are you planning to betray your family?" "Betray the family," I replied quietly, yet firmly. "Who was it that drove out me and Emma?" Without listening to my entire response, my father hung up the phone. In the following months, I worked hard to build a new life. I secured a job as a preschool teacher, and Emma started attending the daycare that my aunt managed. I struggled to balance work and childcare, but I no longer felt the loneliness I had before. "Ms. Hanson." "Good morning." The children greeted me every morning with cheerful voices. Emma was among them. Initially, she had trouble distinguishing between teacher and mom. But now she cleverly uses both terms. Work was enjoyable, and my colleagues welcomed me warmly. Many had seen my social media post, but none showed any negative reactions. Many people supported me, saying, "It was brave of you to speak up." "I don't have the courage you have, Jane." A veteran childcare worker, the head of the facility, remarked one day. "But that courage can support someone else." Indeed, my social media post inspired many messages from others in similar situations. Some were young mothers who had also been driven out of their homes. I started communicating with them, and occasionally they sought advice. My experience might be serving as a guide for others. Emma quickly adapted to her new environment. My aunt's house has a small garden, and she loves playing there. Her innocent smile whispers to my heart, "Your smile is my greatest treasure." Emma has turned 2. She is growing up surrounded by love in my aunt's home. We haven't been in contact with my parents. I exchange messages with Alyssa from time to time. She is desperately trying to rebuild her life. While I haven't fully forgiven her, she has acknowledged her mistakes and apologized. When Emma grows up, I plan to tell her this story, and I will say to her, "You have value. Regardless of your gender, you are irreplaceable. Now we are walking a new path in life. It is not an easy journey, but at least we are truly surrounded by family." I find myself in a somewhat complex situation. More accurately, it's not so much a problem as it is an issue that leaves me uncertain about how to resolve it. My mother and sister have been asking me for money for a long time, but recently it feels like their demands have crossed a line. While I think about cutting ties with them, I hesitate because such actions might make their lives more difficult. However, I have decided not to meet their demands any longer. I am currently 38 years old and have 2 children. I have been living in Ohio for 6 years since I got married. My father, Richard, originally from Houston, decided to divorce my mother due to her infidelity and moved out of our lives. That incident caused him great pain. Whether he truly blamed my mother or was just dealing with the situation, I do not know. When they got divorced, I was 10 years old, and my sister was only 5. During their divorce, there were rumors that he doubted whether my sister was his child, which reportedly was a major reason for the divorce. He left the house to my mother and moved out, but he continued to pay the mortgage. While he spared no expense on my education, he maintained a firm stance of not paying any child support for my sister. I cannot understand why my mother did not object to this situation. He hardly ever contacted us. Still, he occasionally appeared at school to pay my tuition and brought me gifts. By high school, I started reaching out to him on my own. Since then, he became involved in my life and even attended my wedding. For me, the bond with him was stronger than with my mother. Since I started living here, he visited Ohio twice, but that did not continue. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away last year. My mother was not pleased with my close relationship with him. As relations between them worsened, he trusted me and named me as the heir to his estate. He remarried a few years after divorcing my mother, but that marriage produced no children, and I was his only daughter. Therefore, my mother and sister began to harbor strong animosity towards me. The fact that my father truly loved me and left me $400,000 in a trust fund deepened the rift between us. This issue is not just about the inheritance, it involves a more complex clash of emotions. Thanks to Dad paying for my education, I attended better schools, had a wonderful college experience, and overall grew up in a more privileged environment. This was due to the child support he provided. When my parents got divorced, I was still 10 years old, and he began paying child support from that time. Later, additional support for education was provided, primarily going directly to school and university payments from when I was about 12 years old. My mother could not fully manage these funds, but occasionally used part of the child support for my sister and other household expenses. I have always been well aware of my position, and my mother was careful not to upset me. This does not mean that my mother and sister took a terrible attitude towards me directly, but I felt they were not fond of me. Their attitude towards me was cold and stern while I was at home. I was also academically excellent and the type to stand up for myself from a young age. This is probably why my mother did not treat me harshly. Currently, the problem is the $400,000 inheritance left by Dad. As soon as my mother and sister found out about it, they started frequently asking to borrow money. Honestly, this is not the first time I have provided them with financial assistance. As my income increased with my job, so did their demands, and each time I helped them out. I do not feel a special obligation to them, but they are family, and I have supported them because their income is insufficient. My mother works as a cashier in a small store. I work as a staff in a large supermarket, and my sister works in customer service at a boutique. Their combined income is only about half of mine, and that is one reason I feel I must help them. We are not particularly close as a family, but they have never been mean or malicious towards me. A few months ago, my mother called me and talked about wanting to renovate the house. The walls, ceiling, and floors were significantly damaged from years of use. Since Dad left, the house had not been painted once, and no repairs were made to the old wiring. Parts of the ceiling and walls had already started to crumble. Due to a lack of funds, they could not afford to maintain the home. On rainy and stormy days, it's worrisome even being inside the house, she said. The whole house feels like it's about to collapse, and I tried asking the bank for a loan, but the interest rates were too high, she continued. It was clear what she was seeking. My mother wanted financial support from me for the house repairs. Honestly, that conversation was very awkward. It was clear what she wanted, but we never had a frank discussion about the topic. After that conversation, I started avoiding calls from my mother. Usually she calls me about once a month, but this time she was reaching out 3 or 4 times a month. When I finally answered the phone, she said, "The recent bad weather has further damaged the house, and it's dangerous to live in it as it is now." This time, she directly asked for money and promised to repay it in installments. When I asked, "How much money are you thinking of?" she answered, $100,000. I was shocked by the amount and firmly told her, "I can't lend that much money." Then, she casually brought up the topic of inheritance. I was upset but avoided getting into a deep discussion about the trust fund money. Eventually, I told her the maximum amount I could lend was $50,000, and she agreed. However, I later realized that this decision was rash. I could have ignored her without saying anything. But since I had already promised to lend the money, ignoring her was not an option. Still, I felt uneasy about lending such a large amount, so I consulted my husband. He advised, instead of giving the full amount at once, send it in small increments and check the progress of the construction each time. I told my mother, "I will send the $50,000 in installments." I reactivated an old account I had in Houston, deposited the $50,000 there, and gave her access to that account. She asked, "Why don't you transfer the money directly to my account?" I made some rather meaningless excuses. Actually, this was a method my husband had suggested. It has been 2 months since I started lending money to my mother. Recently, I heard from a friend, not from my family, that my sister is getting married. My friend's husband is a wedding planner, and he told me that my sister was arranging a lavish wedding through his agency. My sister did not know that I was friends with them. The cost of my sister's wedding was a grand $50,000. I was shocked to hear about my sister's wedding from someone else. I had no idea about it. At first, I thought it would be a small ceremony with close people, but then my friend said, there will be about 100 guests. I was very sad that I was not invited. While that was the most painful thing, I was also worried about the money issue. Where did she get the funds for such a lavish wedding? It was held at the most luxurious venue in town, with unlimited food and drinks, and the decorations and flowers were of the highest quality. Worried, I checked the bank account where I had sent the money for the supposed renovation. There was no money left. I called my mother to ask if the renovation had started. She said, "I've asked the contractor, but the work hasn't started yet." At that moment, I felt that the renovation story was a lie. And then, I could no longer tolerate her lies. If they had actually used my money for her wedding, it was clear that no work had been done yet. But the thought of taking money from me for home renovations, while spending a large sum on my sister's wedding, made me feel extremely uncomfortable. I wanted to go to Houston immediately to see what was really happening, but I thought it would be pointless. So I called an aunt who lives a few blocks from my mother's house and asked if she knew about my sister's wedding. She said she knew, but she hadn't been invited either. My aunt is my father's sister, and I can understand why my mother doesn't like my father's family. My aunt said, "Your sister's wedding has been the talk among people around here." Indeed, a few years ago, my mother's house was falling apart, and they were desperately working just to put some food on the table, but now they have a fine new home and a lavish wedding. At that moment, I felt dizzy and didn't know how to react. My mother said, "The house hasn't been repaired yet, but my aunt said it was shining with new paint." Then I remembered something. About 6 months ago, my mother had asked me for $20,000 for knee replacement surgery. I called her to ask about the hospital where the surgery was performed. She said, "I don't remember which hospital it was." I asked for details like the name of the doctor or nurse, but she couldn't answer anything. Pretending to be surprised, she acted as if the internet connection was bad and hung up the phone. When I called again, her phone was off for a while, and she didn't respond after that. So, I sent her a text message. However, my message was left unread for days. That's when I finally confirmed that she was lying. The money I gave for the supposed surgery was used for the house repairs, and the money she asked for the repairs was actually used for my sister's luxurious wedding. My aunt further revealed, "Your sister's engagement party was held in the backyard of the family home, where wine was used abundantly to decorate throughout the house." I felt as if I were trapped in deep darkness. I had no idea they were living such a luxurious life while pretending to be poor in front of me and siphoning my money without permission. I then understood they were being kind because they were after my money, but I never expected them to tell such terrible lies to get money from me. If they had been honest with me, it wouldn't have hurt so much. After that, I decided to completely ignore them. I also stopped transferring money to the Houston account. Even when my mother called, I did not answer, nor did I reply to her text messages. Then, suddenly my sister, who hadn't contacted me for years, called, but I did not respond. My relationship with them is over. I no longer intend to engage with their lies and manipulations. What does it matter that I earn more than they do, or that my father left them nothing from his estate? That doesn't give them the right to do what they did. They were just siphoning money from me and deceiving me. When I completely ignored their contacts, my mother called my husband. He inadvertently ruined everything. I had asked him beforehand not to respond to their calls or emails, yet he answered my mother's call. "She is ignoring me," my mother said, crying. Then, she continued, "I needed the money for the renovation." But she broke her promise in the middle of it. My husband accidentally told the truth. I wanted to hit him at that moment. He said I had already known the truth, that my mother had been financially exploiting me for a long time, and that the money was supposed to be used for my sister's wedding, which is why I cut off the relationship. After that call, my mother sent numerous apology emails. "It's all a misunderstanding, and I'm just repaying someone else's money with yours for the house repairs," she said. Of course, this was a complete lie, and as the calls and messages continued non-stop, I sent a message saying, "I will answer the phone if you promise to tell the truth." My mother replied, "Understood," so I called her. Then, she began to tell the truth. My sister wanted a lavish wedding but didn't have enough money for it, so she decided to ask me for money. It was my sister's idea to use the house repairs as a reason to get money from me. They knew I hadn't been to Houston for years and hadn't been in touch with anyone, so they thought I wouldn't notice that the house had already been repaired. "Why didn't you just ask directly for money for the wedding from the beginning?" I asked. She said it was because my sister didn't want that. She further said, "The house was quite damaged, and your sister's fiancé's parents were planning to visit, so we needed to repair it quickly." They couldn't think of a good excuse to get the money from me quickly, so in a panic, my mother called and said, "The doctor recommended emergency knee replacement surgery," and I immediately transferred the money. I remained calm on the phone, but deep inside, I felt profound sadness that my own mother was deceiving me for her benefit. I understand that my mother is financially struggling, but using that as a reason to emotionally manipulate and extort money from me is not acceptable. After knowing all the facts, I couldn't stop crying after hanging up the phone. I don't remember the last time I cried so much. Perhaps it was when my father died. That day, I especially missed my father terribly. He was the only one who loved and cared for me unconditionally. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from my mother saying, I need the rest of the money to continue preparing for the wedding." At that moment, I was very angry and felt like blaming my mother. I couldn't understand how she could say such a thing. There was no sense of regret in her words, and I felt all she wanted was money. Moreover, they didn't even invite me to the wedding. Now that the truth is clear, I am filled with anger. I have blocked both of them from contacting me. I also sternly told my husband not to answer any calls. If he doesn't comply, I'll have him sleep on the porch outside next time. I still keep in touch with my aunt regularly, and I know the wedding is next month. We haven't talked about the money, but day by day I know my mother and sister are preparing for their ideal wedding. As the wedding day approaches, I receive multiple calls and voicemails from my mother and sister asking for money. However, I stood my ground and was not swayed. The last voicemail from my mother said, "I am disappointed in you. We're cutting ties. Never contact or visit me again." Hearing those words, I felt very disheartened and cried in front of my husband. I understand that people around me might blame me for being cruel and horrible for ruining my sister's wedding. My mother also blamed me, calling me selfish and unreasonable, but she never once reflected on the lies she had told. In reality, she had been deceiving me all along. I supported them out of a sense of duty as a family member, but I realized that to them, I was just a source of money. A friend, whose husband was the wedding planner for my sister's wedding, contacted me saying the wedding might be canceled because the expenses haven't been paid. When I asked how much had been paid, she replied, $20,000, I said. $20,000 should be enough for a wonderful wedding, but my friend explained, they've arranged for luxurious decorations, food, and a high-end venue, and that alone has already cost $20,000. Then, she asked if I would attend. I have other commitments, I answered. Knowing that I wasn't very close to my mother or sister, my friend seemed a bit upset by my honesty. I briefly considered sending the remaining expenses to my friend to ensure the wedding proceeded as planned, feeling responsible for ruining my sister's wedding. However, I remembered the last voicemail from my mother. She had told me she was cutting ties with me. If that's the case, then no matter how much I try to help, it would be in vain. My actions might seem harsh, but they were merely a response to their deliberate behavior. Afterward, I turned off my cell phone and went out with my children to reset my mood. The next day, my friend contacted me again. She was angry with my sister. On the day of the wedding, my friend's husband, the planner, had his reputation damaged because he was asked by my mother and sister to make do with the bare minimum, and they promised him an additional $10,000 to somehow manage the basic food and decorations. However, the guests and the groom's family criticized the wedding preparations severely, and my sister blamed everything on the planner. My friend's husband was angry and wanted to tell everyone the truth, but my mother pleaded desperately not to ruin my sister's life. Being a compassionate person, he agreed to stay silent. In the end, they managed to hold the wedding by taking responsibility for it themselves. However, they still haven't paid the promised $10,000. I was filled with deep shame about my family's actions. I stood silently, saying nothing. My friend said, "I'm at a loss for words, but she wasn't blaming me, she just wanted to vent her frustrations to me as a friend." I was very disappointed that my family had been exposed to such an embarrassing situation. My husband told me that they were facing the natural consequences of their actions, so I shouldn't worry too much. They tried to impress others with lies, and now they were paying the price. I felt relieved to have distanced myself from their schemes. The disownment by my mother ultimately steered my life in a better direction. I no longer need to worry about their lies and schemes. The situation escalated more than I expected, and the chaotic wedding became a major local scandal, causing strong resentment from the groom's relatives. According to my friend, the groom's parents began investigating the wedding expenses and discovered I had lent money. Initially, my mother and sister tried to blame everything on the wedding planner, but he had kept all the emails and contracts, which were handed over to the groom's family. These included evidence that my mother had promised financial support from me. The groom's parents were furious upon learning this, leading to a terrible start to my sister's married life. The trust the groom's parents had in my sister and mother was completely broken, and it caused a significant rift in their relationship. The situation worsened, and rumors spread to my mother's workplace. Working as a cashier, my mother suddenly faced a loss of trust from her colleagues due to her sudden lavish lifestyle and the stories of her extorting money from her daughter. Eventually, she felt so uncomfortable at work that she had no choice but to resign. My sister faced a similar situation at the boutique where she worked. Rumors that she had scammed money from me for her wedding spread quickly in the small town. Some customers even began to overtly avoid her. According to recent information from my aunt, my mother and sister are now in a very difficult financial situation. They still haven't paid the remaining wedding expenses, and they're behind on rent for their new home. My mother is struggling to find a new job due to her age and tarnished reputation. Sometimes I wonder if this is too harsh a consequence, but my husband calmly says they brought this upon themselves. Indeed, considering the years of lies, manipulation, and the final act of disownment, perhaps this outcome was inevitable. I occasionally hear about my mother and sister's situation from my aunt, but I keep my distance. This series of events has reaffirmed that without trust, even blood ties do not make a true family. I stayed overseas for nearly a year, seeking work and adventure. During that time, I rented out my apartment to a friend, with a perfect plan to return to my usual life once I came back. However, in reality, the friend living in my apartment got married and moved out, leaving it vacant for the past 6 months. After a long flight, I thought I could finally relax in my own space, but my life quickly took an unexpected turn. The first thing that felt off was an unfamiliar pair of sneakers sitting on the shoe rack. I didn't own such worn-out shoes. Could they have been left behind by my friend? Looking at the living room, I saw the shelves filled with things I didn't recognize, and a gaming console I didn't own was connected to the TV. Empty soda cans littered the table, and fossilized remains of nachos were scattered around. "Welcome back, sis." Clarissa's voice came from the kitchen as my younger sister casually walked out like she owned the place. "What are you doing here? Why are you in my apartment?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though jet lag made it hard to process the situation. "Oh, didn't Mom and Dad tell you?" "I'm staying here for a while. It's temporary." Clarisse spoke as if it were no big deal. I dropped my bag on the floor and glared at her. "You've got to be kidding me. This is my apartment." Clarisse shrugged. "Well, you were gone for so long and Mom and Dad said it'd be fine. I didn't think you'd mind." My blood pressure shot up instantly. "Didn't think I'd mind? You moved into my apartment without asking, and that's your excuse? How long are you planning to stay here?" Clarisse scratched the back of her neck and avoided my gaze. "Foon, I'm not sure yet. I've been unemployed for a while, so probably until I find my next job." Anger surged through me. Not only had my sister invaded my space, but even my parents had made this decision without consulting me. I immediately pulled out my phone and called my mom. After a few rings, she answered. "Welcome back, Audrey. How was your flight?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you know that Clarisse is living in my apartment?" Mom hesitated for a moment. "Well, yes. We thought it would be fine. She needed a place to stay while you were away. It's just temporary. You didn't ask for my permission." I exploded in anger. "Don't overreact. She's your sister. Families help each other, don't they? Does being family mean you can ignore someone's boundaries?" I hung up before I could say something I'd regret and turned to Clarisse. "You need to leave by the end of today." Clarisse looked genuinely upset. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem." But Clarisse made no move to leave. Instead, she started making a sandwich in the kitchen and then sat on the sofa, as if it were her own home. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't physically force my sister out, but I wasn't willing to leave things as they were. That night, as I lay in my bed for the first time in a year, I listened to the sound of Clarice's video game leaking from the living room. This was not how I had imagined coming home. I couldn't believe my parents had approved this. Clarice had always been their favorite. The child who could make mistakes and still be forgiven. Since we were young, Clarice had been treated as someone special in our family. At a sports day event, when Clarice fell and cried, our parents delayed watching my turn to comfort her. I ran my race alone, finishing third, but no one congratulated me. In middle school, when Clarice failed a test, our parents gently said, "You're just not good at studying," and got her a tutor. When I scored A, they scolded me, saying, "You could have done better," and restricted my extracurricular activities. In high school, Clarice broke curfew to go to the mall with her friends, and our parents laughed and said, "Did you have fun?" When I was just 5 minutes late, I was grounded for a week. Even when she used Dad's credit card without permission, they forgave her, saying, "She's learned her lesson." But when I bought stationery, my allowance was reduced. In college, Clarice repeated a year and they supported her, saying, "She's finding her own path." Meanwhile, when I struggled with job hunting, they dismissed it as laziness. This unequal treatment was an unspoken rule that no one ever questioned. I had spent most of my life cleaning up after my sister, but this time it had gone too far. The next morning, I hoped Clarice had calmed down and come to her senses, so I tried to talk to her again. "Clarice, when are you leaving?" Without even pausing her game, she replied, "I don't know. Mom and Dad said they don't mind. I don't have a job, and you're hardly ever here, so you don't really need the space, right?" I was stunned by her audacity. That day, I spent my time trying to get my parents to reason with Clarice and venting to my fiancé, Glenn. Glenn was sympathetic but offered a practical suggestion. Maybe she has nowhere else to go. Talk to your parents again and set a deadline. A deadline. I sighed. She shouldn't even be here. Well, you can't just throw her out on the street, Glenn said reasonably. I knew he was right, but I still wanted to throw all of Clarice's belongings out the window, even though I knew I couldn't. As time passed, it became clear Clarice had no intention of leaving anytime soon. That evening, I called my dad, hoping for a more rational response than I'd gotten from my mom. "Dad, about Clarice, I need my space. This is my apartment. Why didn't anyone consult me?" His response was blunt. "Because we knew you'd say no." I was speechless. So they knew I would object and went ahead anyway. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, fuming. Clarice had turned my home into a mess and taken over my life. And my parents seemed to think I had no right to be upset, because family helps each other. This wasn't a problem I could solve in one day. Clarice showed no signs of leaving, nor did she make any effort to search for a home or a job. My family stood firmly on her side. This was only the beginning, but I intuitively knew this wouldn't end well. The next few days were filled with tension. Arguments and passive-aggressive exchanges with Clarice became a daily occurrence as she continued to occupy the sofa like a permanent fixture. The apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a shared prison with an inconsiderate cellmate. Whenever I tried to reason with her, Clarice responded with indifference or flimsy excuses. "I'm looking for a job," she'd say while scrolling through her phone, or "I have nowhere else to go," she'd reply, sprawled out on the sofa. Breadcrumbs littered the cushions. While I was at work, she seemed to spend her days lazing around the apartment. Every night, I vented my frustrations to Glenn over the phone. "She's impossible. She's not even trying to find another place or a job." Glenn sighed. "Audrey, I get that you're frustrated. But have you actually sat down with your parents to set a firm deadline? They need to understand how much this is affecting you." He was right. Phone calls weren't solving anything, and unless I took a stronger stance, this situation could become permanent. Summoning my courage, I called my mom and proposed a family meeting. She hesitated but eventually agreed. We arranged to meet at my parents' house. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. My mom greeted me with a nervous smile, my dad wore a stern expression, and Clarice plopped into a chair the moment she entered, glued to her phone, as if she had more important things to do. "Audrey," my mom said, ushering me in. "Won't you sit?" I made coffee. "I don't need coffee. We need to talk." I began explaining how Clarice had taken over my apartment, but my dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "What's there to talk about? Family is supposed to help each other." The word help made my blood boil. Help. She's occupying my space without permission and isn't even trying to find another place. How is that helping? Clarice scoffed. "You're overreacting. It's not like I've made a huge mess. Look at the living room." "It's a dump," I shot back. "That's enough," Audrey, my mom, interrupted in a calm but firm tone. "Clarice is going through a tough time right now. She lost her job and rent is so expensive. Surely you can understand that." Maybe I could have understood if someone had asked me, I snapped, unable to contain my anger. Instead, you decided she could live in my apartment without even consulting me, as if my opinion didn't matter. A long silence followed. My mom glanced at my dad, who cleared his throat. "Audrey, you weren't here. What were we supposed to do? Let her become homeless?" I gestured to their spacious house. "Why can't she move back here?" Clarice finally looked up from her phone. "I need to stay close to the city to find a job." "Brilliant idea," I said with dripping sarcasm. "But do you actually have a plan? Are you even looking for a job? Or are you planning to squat in my apartment forever?" "I'm thinking about it," Clarice mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "That's not good enough," I said, turning to my parents. "If this is supposed to be temporary, let's set a deadline. 2 weeks. That should be enough." My mom looked shocked. "Audrey, be reasonable." "No, Mom. I've been reasonable this whole time. That is my apartment. And I'm done being walked all over." My mom opened her mouth to argue, but my dad raised his hand. "Fine. If that's how you feel, 2 weeks it is," he said curtly. My mom looked surprised. Clarice tilted her head in disbelief. "Dad, what did you just say?" 2 weeks, he repeated. I was stunned that my dad had finally taken my side, but Clarice looked as if she had been betrayed. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, grabbing her phone and stomping out of the room. My mom rubbed her temples and sighed deeply. "Audrey, was this really necessary?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I just want my space back. That doesn't make me the bad guy." My mother said nothing, and the silence hung heavily between us. A part of me felt guilty. It was clear she wanted to help Clarice, but at the same time, for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. It felt like I had some degree of control over the situation. The next morning, I left for work early. Around midday, I received a message from Clarice. "You didn't have to corner me like that. Thanks for making me feel awful." I didn't reply. I wasn't going to coddle her or start another argument. Over the next few days, I was away on a business trip and left the apartment unattended. When I returned home after several days, I ran into my neighbor, Julia, in the hallway. She greeted me warmly, though her tone carried a hint of curiosity. "So your sister is staying with you," she said casually. "Yes," I replied curtly. I wasn't in the mood to explain. Julia tilted her head with a curious expression. "It's been quite lively over there. Lots of people coming and going." "What do you mean?" "You know, late-night gatherings with friends, loud music playing." Her words made my stomach churn. How could my neighbor know more about what was happening in my apartment than I did? And on top of that, Julia continued, "I've noticed some suspicious people coming in and out recently." I marched straight to Clarice's room and knocked on the door. "Explain yourself right now. What's going on?" "What are you talking about?" she shot back angrily. "I heard from the neighbor. You've been having loud parties late at night with lots of people. They're just friends staying over. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" "This is my home, not your social hub. If this continues, you'll be out before the 2 weeks are up." Clarice muttered something under her breath and stormed off to the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood trembling with anger in the living room. If all she did was sit on the sofa playing video games, I was willing to honor the family meeting's decision. But the situation was spiraling far beyond what I had anticipated. The real turning point came one evening when Julia knocked on my door again. Her expression was a mix of worry and hesitation. "Audrey, I wasn't sure if I should say this." She glanced over her shoulder before lowering her voice. "But I saw your sister meeting some suspicious people in the parking lot." A wave of dread swept over me. Julia continued. "I was curious and watched from a distance. She had a lot of cash on her and seemed to be exchanging something with them. Do you know anything about this?" With trembling hands, I began searching the spare room Clarice was staying in. Most of it was clothes and miscellaneous items, but beneath a pile of clothes, I found a locked metal box. It was small but heavy, and the fact that it was locked only deepened my suspicions. As I stared at the box, I felt as though opening it would cross a line. But another part of me, tired of Clarice's lies, couldn't resist the urge to uncover what she was hiding. I made up my mind and began searching for the key. After some time, I found it, quickly grabbed the box, and opened it. The moment I opened the box, a wave of realization, deep sadness, and betrayal washed over me. It was the worst-case scenario I had imagined. Quietly, I placed the box back where I had found it. My mind was in turmoil. This was no longer just a matter of an unwanted house guest. If Clarice was involved in illegal activities, especially using my apartment as her base, I could also be held responsible. The next morning, I resolved to confront her. When I cornered her in the kitchen, she looked up from her cereal with a disinterested expression. "Explain the box," I demanded. Her spoon froze mid-air. "What box?" "The metal box hidden under your clothes." "Oh, that," she replied, raising her voice slightly. "I'm just holding it for a friend." I let out a bitter laugh. "Do you even realize how ridiculous that excuse sounds? Who is this friend and why would they trust you with cash and drugs?" Clarice didn't answer. She stared at the floor, like a child caught stealing cookies from the jar. "Of course," I said, my voice cold. "You have until the weekend to get out. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here another minute longer." "Audrey, can't you calm down a little? I'm setting boundaries and enforcing them." I cut her off firmly. "There are no second chances." I knew I was right. Clarice had crossed far too many lines, and I could no longer enable her behavior. Still, a small part of me felt conflicted. She was family, and while I hated her actions, I didn't want to abandon her completely. A few days later, the situation took an unexpected turn. While I was sitting in the living room, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Clarice's ex-boyfriend, Daniel, was standing there. "It's about Clarice," he began, his face serious. "I thought I should warn you." He looked me straight in the eye, his tone grave. Apparently, Clarice wasn't just buying drugs, she had also borrowed a significant amount of money from some dangerous people. If she doesn't pay them back soon, they'll come after her and anyone connected to her. I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean by anyone connected to her?" Daniel's expression hardened as he replied. "They know she's staying here. Audrey, if they can't find her, they'll come after you instead." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about Clarice's irresponsibility anymore. This had escalated into a dangerous situation that could involve my family and anyone else close to her. I now understood just how serious the threat was. Why am I being dragged into this? I felt my voice trembling as I spoke. Hours after Daniel's visit, I was consumed by panic and fury. I thought my relationship with Clarice had always been strained, but now it felt like I was living atop a ticking time bomb. If what Daniel said was true and I had no reason to doubt him, then just having Clarice under my roof put me in danger. The frustration I felt over her freeloading now seemed trivial compared to the gnawing fear taking root in my chest. The moment Clarice walked through the door that night, I confronted her. "We need to talk. Now." "Now," she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "It's not that serious." "Not that serious," I repeated her words. Something inside me snapped at that moment. I couldn't take it anymore. Right in front of her, I pulled out my phone and began typing a tweet. "I have something to share about family. I came back from living overseas to find my sister squatting in my apartment without permission. My parents decided this without consulting me. Family betrayal, no boundaries." Clarice noticed what I was doing and went pale. "What are you doing?" I ignored her and continued typing. "My sister is conducting illegal activities from my home and associating with shady people. My parents, fully aware of this, prioritized her convenience over my safety. Is this what family loyalty means? Toxic family, family secrets." The post went viral almost immediately, with replies and messages of support flooding in. "Dad. Audrey's exposing us on social media," Clarice yelled into her phone as she frantically called him. Minutes later, my mom's name lit up my phone, but I deliberately ignored her call. Instead, I typed out another post. "How much injustice is justified with the phrase, 'because we're family'? My family endangered my life and treated it as normal. I refuse to stay silent any longer. Breaking free from toxicity, truth about family." Within hours, the post garnered thousands of likes and comments, with people sharing their own similar experiences. My story became a voice for countless others dealing with family issues. The next morning, I received a message from my father. "I saw your posts. Even my colleagues are reaching out. Take them down immediately." His commanding tone only fueled my anger. I opened social media again and wrote a detailed post. I shared memories of how Clarice had always been favored, while I was expected to endure and sacrifice. I explained how the current situation was proof that nothing had changed. My friends rallied behind me, sharing my posts widely. Even acquaintances of my parents reached out, expressing their surprise and sympathy. My mom called me in tears. "How could you do this?" "Airing our family's dirty laundry." "Mom, the shame isn't in exposing the truth. It's in behaving this way in the first place," I replied firmly. She was speechless. Glenn was worried about the fallout but stood by my decision. "Sometimes, exposing the truth is the first step toward real change," he said. The public reaction to my posts exceeded my expectations. I received messages from people who had suffered under similar family pressures, thanking me for giving them courage. My posts became a small spark shedding light on the darker aspects of family dynamics. Most importantly, my actions had an impact on my family. For the first time, my father, concerned about his professional reputation, began to reflect on their behavior. My mother, shaken by the reactions from her friends, began to realize the need to reassess her relationship with me. Clarice, unable to endure the mounting criticism flooding her social media accounts, left the apartment before the weekend arrived. It was clear she could no longer stay comfortably after everything that had happened. After she moved out, I went to the police. I reported Clarice and the illegal activities of those she had been associating with. Her exact whereabouts remain uncertain, and it seems she hasn't been apprehended yet, but it's likely only a matter of time. Sometimes I've learned the most effective form of retaliation is simply telling the truth. The days of staying silent to protect my family's reputation are over. I wrote one final post. Family is important, but only when mutual respect for each other's boundaries exists. If you're reading this and suffering in a similar situation, know that you are not alone. Truth about family, the start of change. This experience taught me a lot about my relationship with my family. Sometimes, trying to help those you love can put yourself in danger. And sometimes, the hardest decisions are the right ones to make.